how does the career trajectory of a person who start in sales, for example, what does it look like?
If you're looking to join sales, join an org which is very good at sales. You tend to remember always the 10% people who you hired bad as examples of what not to do again.
Like a lot of people are great individual contributors but might not know the art of getting work done.
So if you have that as an org goal, and if you align teams well, and if you define goals well, you actually will win much faster than just inspiring them by audacious goals.
CBO exactly क्या करता है?
Chief Business Officer or Head of Business role. Very, very critical that you have a very good understanding of the numbers. You are able to catch on fast. You are able to remember your goals well. You are able to divide input metrics and other elements well. If I didn't know how my next month's number is going to come already, the next 30 days, then I'm already behind target.
Welcome to the show, guys. Today I have a very special friend. I've worked with him for a long time, and I know him personally also. We have spent a lot of time together. We play together. He's a great cricketer, if I may say so. And he has had a very interesting life journey, like a professional career, if I may say. Have worked in banking, then he's worked in life insurance, then went on to do consulting, and then did loyalty. And then also did like fintech, now part of Happay. So welcome to the show, Vikas. The idea was to figure out what all have you done. Obviously I've spoken about multiple things you've done, but one of the things which was really intriguing to me was, look, I know of you who we used to look up to at Cred, where you would take care of some portion of business, and now that you are part of Happay in the full-time setup there, taking care of the business, heading there in a more CBO role, that was also something which I was always intrigued कि भाई CBO करता क्या है, but we'll get to that. But quickly, if you could just give us a small snippet of what all have you done. IIM, you've been a graduate of IIM Bangalore.
Yep.
What year was that?
2001 to 3.
2001 to 3. तो मतलब वो बहुत पुराना हो गया, कुछ याद है कि नहीं?
मैं खुद बहुत पुराना हो गया.
नहीं, ठीक है. But look, if you could just speak about like your journey of getting into IIM, and after 21 years, like अब तो 20 साल हो गए IIM छोड़े हुए, people generally see that benefit कि अच्छा IIM से निकलेंगे तो ये फायदा होगा करियर में. 20 years down the line, IIM का क्या फायदा है? Like if you could just speak on that, that will be really help to begin with.
I think, thank you first for having me here. This is one of the firsts for me as well. So I think it is something that will be a learning for me. I think for people who have done IIMs, I think the journey itself is incredible from a perspective of where they start to where they end up. 20 years hence, it's hard to say whether an IIM would have made a difference or not, right? Hindsight always makes things much more simpler to observe. But when you're going through the journey, for me, it was a big lift off from where I started being into an IIM to where I ended up after the IIMs, both in terms of financial and in terms of confidence, in terms of the words you use, in terms of the friends you have. I think it builds all of that. But beyond everything else, it actually brings in a decent business acumen if you don't have any to start with. It's not that you cannot earn the same knowledge outside of an IIM. It's just that it gets crammed into a fairly short time.
Right.
And it kind of gives you a little bit of more faster compounding, if you will. If you can use that to your advantage, great. Otherwise, the other benefits are always there. But as you go more and more and longer into your career, you'll realize that what you do matters more than what you had learned long back, right? So I think the textbooks and the jargons tend to change over a period of time, and that's no longer relevant. But I think the ability to compound, network, make friends, understand things from a more distilled manner are strengths that you obviously will enjoy. IIMs are not the only answer to that. You will of course have other more professional courses that give you this, but yeah, I think that's one of the great benefits.
But वो क्या होता है ना कि like IIM is a tough place to get in for most people. You've
100%.
been an IIM Bangalore graduate. I'm sure like I think even at that time like A, B, C, at least the top 3 colleges, if I may say, IIMs में. Now you have so many more IIMs. At least when I was trying to write and take my CAT, I think उस समय 6 IIM होते थे, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
A, B, C, वही same time है, मतलब मैं आपसे 4 साल ही छोटा हूँ. IEL के यही होते थे ना.
Yes.
तो आई थिंक लखनऊ बाय द वे बहुत सारी जनता मुझे मिलती है जहाँ लखनऊ की भी है आजकल, बट बैंगलोर हैज ऑलवेज बीन लाइक अ वेरी टफ प्लेस टू गेट इन. वाज एट दैट टाइम इट वाज रियली एकेडमिक टाइप था, मतलब या केस स्टडी वगैरह, मतलब हाउ वाज योर लाइफ एट IIM from an academics point of view?
See, I think to start with, I was super lucky that I got into it, right? I actually was not pursuing MBA. I didn't know what an MBA meant really. Coming from a really small town, I had no clue what an MBA was, what it could do for you. I was pursuing CA, and one of my cousins was pursuing MBA, and he happened to go to a workshop where he pulled me along, and one thing led to the other, and I think we got into one of the IIMs. I think for me, the journey itself during that time of getting into IIM was not an academic one, right? It was riddled with grit, a lot of desperation, some bit of luck splattered onto it. And then within IIM, I don't think I would have found it very, very academic. I was coming from studying CA. That was truly academic, if you will, right? Very theoretical, very, very down to making sure you learn all the laws, the accounting principles, the accounting standards that come with it. MBA therefore was a far more practical knowledge-based element for me. I did find case studies and other things academic, more so because I did not have professional experience before that. But I think overall, much more practical even then. I'm presuming it's become better now. But yeah, it used to be far more.
But have you gone back to the college? कुछ ऐसा scene?
Yeah, we do reunions and stuff. We go back to the college. The college itself has changed.
And now, thankfully, you're in Bangalore only, no?
Yes.
So, but you said that you came from a small town. So can you just you're not born and brought up in Bangalore?
No.
So how has that journey been? Like, which city were you born in? Like, which small town are you talking about?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's still a small town. It was a place called Siliguri, North Bengal mein. It used to be a very, very small town, about 15 kilometers across, less than 10 lakh people's population. One of the convent schools there is where I studied, made most of my friends there. And then family moved to Jaipur. So when I went to IIM, that time family was in Jaipur. And we went from there, did some coaching there, and then got into the IIMs. The journey itself has been very, very interesting, right? I did not actually attend college. I did college in Bikaner while I was working in Jaipur during my undergrad. So college was mostly giving exams and admissions and those formalities. And then IIM happened because one of my cousins, as I said, was looking to pursue it.
पर उस cousin का हो गया कि नहीं IIM में?
नहीं,
या आपका ही हो गया?
नहीं, उनका नहीं हुआ.
अच्छा, चलो ठीक. But coming back to the correlation, if I may, of the IIM education, or even let's just make it more broad. Generally in MBA, which is seen by a lot of people कि वो must है. Like a lot of people होता है ना कि भाई आप ग्रेजुएट हो तो मतलब क्या ही है, मतलब यू नीड टू डू पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशन. आई थिंक वन ऑफ द मोस्ट सॉट आफ्टर पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशंस or type of post graduations in India, at least is MBA. Obviously, at the peak of which college can you get in, I think IIM becomes that place. But generally, MBA ने कितना help किया, given that while I was speaking in your intro, you've worked in very very diverse areas. मतलब हो सकता है कि आप diversity और maintain के लिए आप manufacturing में भी चले जाते हैं. मतलब अब यही छूट गया है कि वो manufacturing service trade जो हम उसमें differentiate करते हैं. At least from a services point of view, you've been at banking, you've been at life insurance, consulting किया उसके बाद, then you were at loyalty. I would love to understand loyalty में होता क्या है and how did that happen, and then fintech happened. Did your MBA actually help you do this transition really well? Like, how was MBA helpful in doing this?
Look, I don't think MBA prepares you for different transitions, different kinds of roles in your life. I think you have to be open to those yourselves. You have to take those chances. But to answer the first part of your question, right, where you've been asking, is MBA useful in general for people? I think, look, if you're doing other professional courses, MBA teaches you the same basic life skills that other professional courses would. It just does it in a more democratic arena where you're not an engineer or a science student or a PMT doctor or something, right? It just opens up the world a little wider to enter the business world, if you will, right? It's definitely not the right route if you want to be an engineer, a coder, or a scientist, or some other such specialized domains like a doctor or something. But yeah, it does open up the business world a little better. It exposes you to a little of everything, like marketing, like sales, like business management, like your behavioral science. So it gives you a little more splattering of everything, and then you get to choose which ones you can do. But it does not help you pick the right career. It helps you maybe identify what your key strengths and different alignments are. But if you're changing different things, I don't think it prepares you to open up yourself up to all of these.
Cool. Thanks for the intro of the the MBA part of it, and how that has impacted. I think one of the things which I was always very keen to understand from you, obviously, cred happened, which was your shift from loyalty to fintech. Two sides of this question. One is, the first is, how did that happen? Like, how did loyalty mein kaam kar rahe the, and then you suddenly came into cred, which is very fintech heavy. And I think you were also taking care of a couple of businesses which were more aligned to payments arena. More, I think, if I may say, acquiring side primarily. How did that happen? Were you like, was it an extension of what you were doing earlier? Or was it just something new that you wanted to try out?
So look, you either extend vertically or you extend horizontally, right? Either you're functionally trying to replicate your success or skills in different companies, or you stick to an industry and say, I'll become an expert in this. I think I have been moving industries, if you will, or within industries, at least more flavors of different functions as well. The idea has always been that what you can carry, first principles basis, you carry it to the next job. There are some happy accidents that have happened. MBA is one of them. My first job was in sales, and I was super underprepared for sales. You put an introverted, introspection-oriented person in sales in the first job, it's probably a bad choice, but the org made the choice, and I learnt a lot from it, right? I was completely green, got put undercover into a sales journey, and understood at a ground level how exactly sales happens. That also exposed me to a lot of people management skills, right? Then you replicate that in what loyalty did, which was a project management very early on in ICICI Bank. We were looking to build a loyalty program, which would be a bank-wide program. Long back then, there used to be a program called Nectar in the UK. And ICICI, Mr. Kamath loved that program, and they wanted to replicate that in India. There was a small team that got created, and I got part of that team because I was not very impressed with what I was doing in sales and how I could grow in it. And jab wo hua to we took it up and we said we'll run it as a project. One thing led to another. We carved it out as a separate company, and it became IIM, which was the birth of what is now known as Payback. Which is now known as Payback. It got carved out as a separate company. Later on, got bought by Amex, and then Amex sold it off recently to BharatPay. But that was another happy accident, right? Joining sales, not liking it, and then going on to lead the project of IIM as a part of the team became a very, very different experience. What I realized there is I'm good at relationship management, not at hardcore selling, but very good at relationship management. Longer term aspects of benefiting from those relationships is building businesses, building the network that helps you build businesses.
Right.
And that started there. Then got into different dimensions of what financial services industry is all about. So did some bit of insurance after Payback, and then consulted in banking and financial services. But then I got back again happily to Loyalty when Loyalty One came to India. Loyalty One was trying to set up a very similar program like Payback, did not become very successful in India. They misled the market a bit. We as a team did not do a great job.
This was what year?
This was 2012 and 13.
Okay.
Yeah, so just about a year and a half, 20 months or to be precise. So Loyalty One actually wanted to be anchored by a grocery partner. There weren't very strong grocery partners in India, and then went on to shut shop. And that's when another happy accident happened, which was Jet Privilege, right? Jet Privilege was at the cusp of being carved out as a separate company from Jet Airways. Joined that, led the non-air business or the business side of it, bringing in a lot of partners, bringing in a lot of merchants. So then the other horizontal skill I built was now scaling up business from a merchant partnerships point of view, which essentially is what I started in Cred as, right? So while acquiring has a very stringent definition in how payments looks as a business, and end of the day,
मैं banking background से हूँ ना, तो functional सोच पाता हूँ.
हाँ, तो end of the day आप merchants लेके आ रहे हो, merchant का value proposition बना रहे हो, you're making sure that there is enough meat for them in whatever you're offering, and there is enough benefit for you to have them. And I think if you can strike a good balance there, then it is essentially a partnership of sorts that you're trying to create.
And when did Happay happen for you? Like, obviously Happay is a 100% owned cred company.
Yeah.
When did Happay happen for you? Like, when did you shift from your full-time cred role to a Happay role?
I think that was April last year.
Okay.
I think it was the cusp of the financial year end, where Kunal, Rahul and me had a chat and we decided that Happay is another role that needs some attention right now. And that's when Happay happened. Yeah.
तो Happay में अभी आप CBO, Chief Business Officer. मुझे ना ये डेजिग्नेशन आज तक समझ नहीं आई है. Because, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, you have a sense कि look, a CBO would be interested in a primary metric, which I think generally as an organization, the CEO is also interested in, which is the top line revenue, all of that. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, while you were speaking about those times when KVK was the CEO, and then I was also part of ICICI then. But since you're 4 years elder to me, हो सकता है overlap नहीं बना होगा तब का. But हमेशा से ये था कि तब head of business बोलते थे. CBO as a term obviously थोड़ा आज ज़्यादा सुनने में आता है at least. Probably I'm more aware now. पहले शायद था, मुझे नहीं पता था. But मेरे को कभी समझ में नहीं आया कि first of all कि CBO अगर revenue पे focus कर रहा है तो CEO भी तो revenue पे focus कर रहा है. तो coming to small questions, just to break my thought into smaller questions. CBO exactly क्या करता है? जो मेरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है वो सही है या थोड़ी और obviously I'm sure evolved होगी. And given that you've been taking care of this from a CBO lens for good 1 year, more than 1 year, how has what have you come to understand about the role of a CBO?
Look, we are a very designation hungry nation, right? मतलब हमारे यहाँ पे corporates में designation thick and fast flow करते हैं. So CBO बोल लो, head of business बोल लो, in a very small company, head of growth या head of revenue बोल लो. Essentially वही है. The large part of the role is to make sure that the business is growing, right? So growth comes. Now growth comes from making sure that you understand what your sales and distribution channels are, what kind of partnerships both on supply and demand side do you need, and what is your revenue unit economics, right? At what price should you be selling? What is the cost structure that you have? And how do you create a gap between the two more and more as you scale up? So that you are able to get it. Now, in a large company, you can call this a CBO. In a small company, you can call this head of growth or head of revenue. But essentially, those are the dimensions of the role to answer a small question in a very short answer.
But then, so how has the role evolved or changed from what you were doing at, say, Cred to what it is for you at Happay? Is there a change?
So there is. I think the Cred pace setup in Cred was at a very nascent stage even when I took over, right?
Yeah.
So large part of it was less monetization, more about growth and scaling up. I think if you're not relevant enough in the market, monetization is a very secondary objective, especially in growth organizations. In a large org like Happay, it became more P&L focused. It became more brand focused. So you have to represent your brand in a very certain manner. The change management that we had to do over the last 1 year was also a large part of how to make sure business is insulated from all the changes that are happening inside the org. So it's been slightly different from obviously where Credpay was.
So you're saying कि जो CBO का role है is essentially focusing on like when the organization has gotten to a place where it's very P&L first, immediate outcome is भाई तुम कितना profit loss बना रहे हो, top line कितना book कर रहे हो, because there could be other companies which are at an early stage वहाँ पे business may still be trying to solve for market share and not necessarily say top line numbers getting created. Is that a good understanding of it?
So see, it's fair. Let me go back to a question you asked earlier, right? What does a CEO do versus what does a CBO do?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, please.
I think if you were to take the analogy of a ship, right? I think a CEO is essentially telling you where we need to land up, right? A COO is running the ship and the engine more efficiently, making sure there's enough firepower to keep propelling forward. A CBO is essentially navigating the waters, right? It tells you which wave to avoid, which one to ride, how to make sure that new opportunities or currents are taken advantage of, right? To not stretch the analogy, I think essentially that's the role of a CBO, right? In a large organization, it tends to become better defined because there are boundaries drawn around it. And you have other roles, again, designations to be thrown like CMO, CPO, right? And everyone, whether one rolls into the another is different for every organization. But इनसे क्या होता है कि CBO का boundary बड़ा clearly define हो जाता है कि आपको ये करना है. In a smaller company, whatever it's called, whether it's head of growth or head of business or head of revenue, essentially the overlap is higher because the ability to influence decisions in other areas is higher. Happay just happens to be in a transition and therefore we have a mix of both roles depending on how strong another function is. But if you were to ask me, is it changing over a period of time? It does change. I think it's more loosely defined initially because everyone is much more closely aligned to doing everything.
Right.
And then as the organization progresses and you have more clearly defined boundaries, better processes and more clear goals for everyone, I think it just becomes sharper and sharper as a definition that these are the three things you need to do and two you don't. But if you ask me, of all the roles that I have essayed, and I have essayed multiple roles, CBO tends to have a set of influences more laterally than just linearly. And to define that better, like it's not just that you're driving sales and partnerships or growth, you actually end up influencing your product strategy, your marketing strategy, even your org design strategy, because you need to have a say in how the business will shape up and how it needs to be able to take advantage in a fairly agile manner of different opportunities that will come in the market, right? So then if you have to go and tell product team to build something new or marketing to position yourself differently or become more revenue focused than just branding focused, I think that's a CBO's job to influence those outcomes in other departments.
हाँ मतलब मैं यही पूछने लगा था क्योंकि look at the end of the day everybody is chasing, like the organization is chasing revenue. Top line बनेगा उसके बाद तो then everything else becomes and you know a number on top of that number.
Yeah.
But primarily आप कितना बेच रहे हो is very very important. I think that becomes like a chief task or one of the key L0 metric for say a CBO.
Yeah.
But anyway सब लोग इस पे काम कर रहे हैं तो सबका या तो डायरेक्ट इम्पैक्ट है रेवेन्यू या इनडायरेक्ट है, सेकंड थर्ड ऑर्डर इफेक्ट है. Thus I was about to ask you how closely is the CBO or head of business, so that even if in some organization there is a head of business जिसको CBO नहीं बोला जा रहा है, ideally सेम ही चीज़ है, how closely does a head of business end up working with all areas of the organization? क्योंकि बहुत बार देखा है मैंने, जैसे बहुत लार्ज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, एटलीस्ट बैंक्स में आपने भी काम किया, सॉरी मैंने भी किया है, अगर आप ऑपरेशंस के पार्ट हो तो आपके पास एक सेट प्रोसेस है, मैं उसको फॉलो करता हूँ और मैं फिर यू नो आई जस्ट स्टार्ट फ्रॉम ए पॉइंट एंड बी पे पॉइंट पे पहुँचना है, ख़त्म करके आगे बढ़ता हूँ. इवन इफ आई एम अ सीनियर पर्सन आई माइट हैव मल्टीपल डिफरेंट प्रोसेसेस रिपोर्टिंग अंडर मी एंड आई विल टेक केयर ऑफ ऑल ऑफ देम कि भाई ठीक से हो रहा है कि नहीं, एरर्स नहीं हो रहा है, सब गलती नहीं हो रही, सब काम ठीक से हो रहा है. थोड़ा और इवॉल्व करते हो तो आप ये भी देखते हो अच्छा प्रोसेस करने का कॉस्ट क्या है, बिकॉज अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम ऑपरेशंस एंड डूइंग ऑपरेशंस इज cost function to most places. Sales, business, all of that is more profit center, if I may distribute the entire set of functions inside an organization into cost function and profit centers. But वहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा क्या बोलना चाहिए, कोलैबोरेशन का अपॉर्चुनिटी भी नहीं होता है, प्लस आई थिंक डीएनए भी नहीं होता है. शायद इसीलिए डीएनए, वैसे डीएनए वाली जनता को भी आप उसमें लाते हो. Is working in a business setup where you're taking care of this vertical, does it require one to be supremely high collaborative and work with various other teams? Like how do you view that?
So let me try and take a different angle at this, right? Large organizations tend to become very good at doing things deeply and in a very systemic manner.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
What that means typically is that your roles will get slivered out more finely than it would be in a smaller org. Smaller orgs tend to give you more freedom, but it comes with lack of processes and therefore more opportunity to influence outcomes. In a larger organization, I think things थोड़े ज़्यादा streamlined होते हैं, right? Well-oiled machinery in most places, not everywhere. What that does is you are not worried about whether or not when you are moving ahead will the rest of the organization follow, right? Goal alignment and other things tend to get sorted. In a smaller organization, the collaboration has to be much higher. The ability to influence outcomes in other divisions or other departments have to be much higher. And I think therefore it changes as the organization evolves.
Got it. And one more question, sorry, I had on the fact which we were discussing around while obviously somebody ends up working at a decently large organization, how do they, like, do you really need people, which was something we were discussing earlier, do you really need people who are really collaborative in nature generally by, because देखो collaboration करना है but nature में ही नहीं है, मुझे अपना काम करना है. Like a lot of people are great individual contributors but might not know the art of getting work done, might not know how to work with multiple other people. And I'm sure you also know multiple such people कि यार उनको काम दे दो, अपना भैया अपना दरवाजा बंद करते हैं, अपना जहाँ पे भी wherever they have their own safe space वहाँ बैठ के काम करते हैं, but साथ में बैठ के becomes a challenge for them. Is succeeding in a sales function, like, are these attributes a necessity for them to succeed?
Yeah, I personally don't think there is any department or function in an org which cannot become better with collaboration.
So, but एक DNA का requirement भी है.
Yeah, is it a must-have? I think for some functions, yes. I think functions that I can think of, marketing, product, HR, sales and business functions, I think collaborations are must-have, right? I think there is no getting away from these, even project management functions. There are some functions which don't necessarily need it, but I don't think there is any function that cannot become better by more collaboration. I think, personally, I believe that if goal alignment and collaboration does not exist in a company, it will find hardest, no matter how good the talent, no matter how easy the opportunity to go and win, it will find hardest in the market to go and win its objectives.
By the way, while you were speaking about what you were, goals is a word you spoke about. And a lot of times when we were, in our early 20s, we used to get goals.
Yeah.
And business goals. Can you speak about how does, say, head of businesses or even CEOs, because I'm sure head of business, when a CEO is working with their CBO, they're relying कि चलो ठीक है हम, like he's the captain of the ship as you said, but you're still relying on the person to navigate right. कि अच्छा navigation वाला काम या business वाला काम in our actual discussion, वो this person is taking care of. From that point of view, goals कैसे decide होते हैं बहुत सारी जगह पे? Like ऐसा हुआ कि अच्छा आपने भाई, I'm just giving an example, $1 million आपने टॉप लाइन किया था. अब लोग कहते हैं अच्छा यार एक है तो अब हम 3 कर देते हैं. Like is it really subjective? Or is it there is some objective or there is some method to the madness behind defining goals in business? Because I'm sure a lot of people are like boss ने बोल दिया कर दो 3x कर देते हैं. ऐसे तो 3x होता है. So how does that happen? Is there some method to the madness?
Yeah, look, ये one of the hardest questions to answer है as a business guy, right? I think दोनों अप्रोच देखे हैं मैंने एंड मेरे हिसाब से दोनों अप्रोच काम करते हैं कॉन्टेक्स्ट के हिसाब से. एक अप्रोच है कि आपने 3x कर दिया, 5x कर दिया, you have big audacious goals, it's inspirational, there's a huge war cry in the org that we've got to hit this number. ये finishing line है हमारी, right? The one purpose goal serves very well is it draws a finishing line and gives you a sense of progress or lack of progress, right? That you can physically see the org moving or not moving towards the goal. Otherwise, there might be a lot of distance, very little displacement that an org is covering if you don't have a clear finishing line. What that finishing line is it a strong, audacious, big, hairy, scary goal which just inspires people to go after it helter-skelter? And if you have a strong talent team which is in general audacious in nature and an org which has abundance and enables them better, then I think a audacious goal and drawing a line in the sand is a great approach. The other approach is you look at where you are, how much can you stretch yourself, and then give an inspirational goal which is beyond that stretching capability so that people are still inspired to go and achieve that goal. The worst kind of goals are the ones that are very, very achievable, right? The only two tragedies in life. You either don't achieve what you have set out to do or you achieve them too quickly, right? In both cases, there is very little motivation left to go beyond, right? So I think if you have something that can be achieved too quickly, then I think you will fail to inspire the org to become better and grow and compound from there. And if you draw a line which is just too audacious and midway people realize that this is not something which is achievable, there's a high chance that people may drop off as well. So it's a very, very fine art. It's one of the most difficult questions to answer. I personally typically like to do both ways, and it therefore takes me a little longer, but I know what is achievable and what bottoms up I can build up to and what are the stretches. If I at least personally know 70 to 80% of the path to the goal I can take, and then I can stretch myself to maybe a 120, I think that is a great place to be in, because then I know at least 60-70% of the goal I'll be able to achieve from what I know of, and the rest I have to figure out. And I think that's a great place for an evolved org. For an org which does not know yet what the goal should be, I think audacious goals work well, because then it gives you a sense of purpose, right? A war cry which you need to steer the org towards, because you don't really have the bottoms up knowledge yet. And therefore I think different stages, different answers. Very, very hard to get it right all the time.
No, but इससे तो मैं agree करता हूँ guys कि the point is अगर कुछ defined ही नहीं है तो then I think the TAM as we say, total addressable market, कि मतलब you should be say 5-10% of the market to become relevant.
Yeah.
उसके बेसिस में मतलब आप बहुत एक मेटा से चालू करके एक नंबर पे आ सकते हो कि मतलब 1 साल में इतना करना है, 1 महीने में इतना करना है. And obviously the smaller you are, the smaller time frame you start thinking on also. बिल्कुल ही स्टार्ट करोगे तो 1 हफ्ते बाद ये हो जाना चाहिए, becomes the idea. And बहुत बड़ी कंपनी हो तो then you think of quarters if not yearly.
Yeah.
But the point I was trying to also understand was, and I'm thinking more from a person who's employed. मतलब मैं CXO के point of view से नहीं पूछ रहा हूँ. But say for example, I'm reporting to you, or I am reporting to somebody who's reporting to you, because large organizations also have hierarchy. We should also discuss how much of a hierarchy is important in a sales function, because बाकी सारे function में तो चलो बहुत ज़्यादा collaboration है. We've seen marketing might not be that hierarchical or few other places. But the question I would first want to understand is, a lot of what is getting defined as goals or things you want to achieve in a decently evolved organization is dependent on what you think is what you think can be achieved. But अब जो नीचे जो जनता एग्जीक्यूट कर रही है सेल्स में, अब वो तो से उनका perception of what can be achieved might be different than yours. They are also supremely driven by, and correct me if I'm wrong, most people's remuneration, salary structures in sales is dependent on achieving a set number, which is defined by somebody else कि ये achieve करना है. तो ये dysfunctional behavior भी होता होगा ना इसमें, कि मुझे नहीं लगता है कि ये अचीव हो सकता है, पर विकास जो हमारे बॉस हैं, I'm just giving an example, उनको तो लगता है भाई 5x हो जाना चाहिए based on some aspect, and then 5x के जब हमने 3x भी कर दिया तो मैं फेलियर हूँ, और मेरी सैलरी का यार पूरा देयर इज अ बिग इंसेंटिव स्ट्रक्चर विच वाज पार्ट ऑफ माय सैलरी स्ट्रक्चर, वो तो मेरे को मिलेगा ही नहीं. सो विल देयर नॉट बी अ लॉट ऑफ डिसोनेंस बिटवीन द एग्जीक्यूशन ऑफ सेल्स एंड द डिसीजन मेकिंग पार्ट ऑफ द सेल्स फंक्शन?
बट सेड ये होना है, राइट? एज इन
नहीं, मैं बोल रहा हूँ द क्वांटम माइट बी रियली लार्ज ना, बिकॉज जैसे बैंक्स वगैरह में हम देखते थे कि सेल्स में बहुत हाई टारगेट, एंड इंश्योरेंस यूज्ड टू बी अ बिग थिंग. एटलीस्ट मैं ब्रांच में जब काम करता था, इंश्योरेंस यूज्ड टू बी द, मतलब कुछ हो ना हो सर्विस उस कस्टमर को ज़्यादा मिलती थी जो इंश्योरेंस कराता था, है ना. मतलब एटलीस्ट ब्रांच में तो यही होता था. आई एम होपिंग कि ब्रांचेज हैव इवॉल्व्ड. एनीवे, बहुत सारे टेक आ गया है अब तो. 20 years ago इट डिडंट यूज्ड टू बी दैट. बट मेरा इंसेंटिव जहाँ अलाइंड है मैं उस पर क्लियरली काम करता था, और इंसेंटिव नहीं हो पा रहा है तो, और इंसेंटिव बाय द वे इस बात पे डिफाइंड है ना कि ये नंबर मिनिमम करना है, विच कीप्स गोइंग अप एवरी ईयर, विच इज अगेन टाइड टू द गोल वाला पार्ट. कि अभी मैंने पिछला 1 crore का बिजनेस किया था फॉर एग्जांपल, अब मेरे बॉस के बॉस ने डिसाइड किया कि अब तो 5 crore होना चाहिए, और मुझे पता है भाई प्रैक्टिकली तो 2 crore से ज़्यादा हो ही नहीं सकता है, तो मेरा तो इंसेंटिव मर गया है. तो एक तो मैं डीमोटिवेट भी हो सकता हूँ, आई माइट स्टार्ट लुकिंग आउट ऑल्सो. लाइक ये जो पुल एंड पुश है, पुल अवे फ्रॉम रियलिटी या पुशिंग what can be done, cannot be done. How does that work in a sales function from your point of view at the top?
So there are too many answers that I hear. So let me start at one point and then get to the other options here, right? To me, एक चीज जो हमेशा प्रॉब्लम रहेगी is if all of your sales members, or let's any department, right? If all of the department members are achieving their goals, then there wasn't enough stretch. And this is not to say that you should always make sure some people don't. I'm just saying that if they achieve their goals very easily, then there wasn't enough stretch in the org, right? There is always Pareto, right? There will always be some people who are better than others, even in a highly talented org. And some will figure out better ways of doing things than others will. In the toughest of sales targets that I've seen, either a bank setup or any insurance company or any other company setup, there are some who still achieve their goals, right? If there is a place where no one's achieving their goals, then you have a challenge in hand because you're defining really unrealistic goal. 1 cycle, 2 cycle, and you will have people getting a little dispassionate about really going after their goals itself. But if there's a place which is on the other spectrum where everyone's achieving their goals, you have another problem on your hand. So I think there will always be a push and pull, and there'll always be a, let's say, calibration of how exactly do you need to set these goals. Larger organizations which have very, very audacious goals, if they're not enabling their teams better, or at least pointing to a path which can help them achieve and then make sure that they execute well, will fail over a period of time if they don't inspire the people enough, but also enable them. Smaller organizations, I think it's okay to fail. Most of the smaller organizations are actually okay with a lot of their people failing as long as they take care of their incentives and other alignments, right? So to me, if you ask, again, the answer is the same, that if it's a smaller org and the goals are hairy and audacious, where it's very difficult to figure out the how-tos, it's okay because you can course correct and you can give the team that psychological safety and the trust that it will be taken care of. In a large organization where execution is paramount, if you need enabling features, the org needs to provide that, but there still needs to be stretch. I think this healthy push and pull.
ये मुझे वो भी वर्ड मेरे दिमाग में आता है कि So what I understand from your defining the entire process is, yeah, a good goal is where you push your team and create that stretch so that everybody is fighting to achieve that number, and that becomes audacious also.
See, the real motivation is the opportunity to prove yourself as someone, or proving somebody wrong, or achieving something as a goal which was very difficult to achieve. It's not about winning the money or the bonus. The actual motivation is I was able to achieve a goal which seemed so hard at the beginning that I most would have given up. That if you can find that exact stretch for every individual in the team, I think you would have won. Which is why it is so difficult. Every individual comes with extremely difficult. तो सबके लिए आप एक गोल बनाना मुश्किल हो जाता है. So if you have that as an org goal, and if you align teams well, and if you define goals well, you actually will win much faster than just inspiring them by audacious goals. But if you're just saying that bonus is the only way to win their motivation in the longer run, then I think it's not a great strategy actually.
So because one more question I had was ki, say for example there's a person who's joining, and look, at the end of the day CBO एक ही है, people under reporting to CBO 4-5-8 लोग होंगे, but a lot of people generally are executors, and those are young folks who are starting in their career. Can you give us like a glimpse, because you've done sales for a long time in your life, how does the career trajectory of a person who starts in sales, for example, what does it look like, and the career trajectory to reach, say, a top position where you essentially end up heading a sales function? How does that look like?
Mm-hmm. So look, I think pehla problem is I don't think CBO sales function hai.
Okay.
Right? So I think there is a sales function that grows into being a CBO or a business head. I think business head is more complicated than just selling. But a trajectory from, if you start in sales, how do you become a CBO, or can you chart your path to a CBO with more deliberation than by chance or by accident? I think 2-3 things that a CBO needs to be very good at, right? I think they need to have a very cross-functional view of the business. So early on in your career, if you're starting with sales, while you have to be good at your numbers and you have to achieve them, I think at a certain point you need to start exploring roles which will give you other exposures, whether that's marketing, whether that's product, whether those are P&L responsibilities. I think it's extremely important that you understand the overall business and how it's set up, what the input metrics and key drivers are on revenue and cost side, so that you can, when you are a CBO, be able to reflect and be able to drive a strategy or the org in guidance terms, right? That's one area, I think, cross-functional exposure. And then second is obviously people management, right? At a senior leadership level, irrespective of which one it is, you need to get into some people management roles early on, and not just managing junior teams, but also managing seriously good talent, so that your ability to build and inspire a good talented team is there. Because as a senior official, you will need to be able to do that, and that's not specific to CBO. And the third thing, I think you need to get better at numbers and more comfortable with numbers. I think a business role, a chief business officer or head of business role, very, very critical that you have a very good understanding of the numbers. You're able to catch on fast, you're able to remember your goals well, you're able to divide input metrics and other elements well.
So ये जो input metrics है, what do you mean by input metrics?
हाँ जी, तो
like कोई बंदा जो चालू ही कर रहा है, and say for example I'm 23-24-year-old person, how I would love to be 24 again by the way. I'm like, what is an input metric? If you could also, because वो तो हो सकता है उनमें से एक आधा ही बंदा है या बंदी है जो सोच रहा है भाई कि हम तो बिजनेस हेड बनेंगे वो.
हाँ जी.
What is the input metric which they should focus on? Actually है वो क्या, और कैसे उस पर फोकस करना चाहिए?
Yeah. So let's take entry level sales role as an example, right? What you sell and how much you sell is what is an outcome. Your goal is often set like this, unfortunately, but that is the outcome. वो achieve करना है आपको. But उसको करने के लिए what are the things that you need to do? Right? So a typical sales, let's say in a B2B SaaS business or even in a retail business, how many people are you meeting, right? And how many meetings does it take to get somebody interested to convert it, right? And to meet so many people, how many doors will you have to knock? Are great input metrics. In traditional terms, it will be called building your pipe and then converting your pipe. But essentially to build your pipe, you have to start somewhere. You have to start knocking on doors, whether that's LinkedIn, whether that is another way to reach out to cold calling. You reach out to X number of people, you'll be able to generate Y number of meetings, and maybe Z number of people will get interested, which you will eventually convert to who you actually have a conversion on. So for you as a sales manager, it's very important that you track these things, get to an understanding of what ratio does it create for you to work with a success metric and therefore work outcome backwards कि अगर मुझे 10 फाइनल क्लोजर्स लाने हैं तो मुझे इतने लोगों से आज मिलना पड़ेगा, राइट?
तो मैं ये बोल सकता हूँ कि सेल्स में टॉप डाउन अप्रोच बेटर वर्क करती है कि भाई मुझे ये चाहिए तो उसके लिए उल्टा आप काम करो कि भाई इतने लोगों से मिलना है, ये करना है, रादर देन बॉटम्स अप करना कि यार मैं इतना कर सकता हूँ, उसके बेसिस पे इतना ही बनेगा।
यार हर फंक्शन में यही काम करता है सिर्फ, मेरे हिसाब से गोल बैकवर्ड्स काम करना चाहिए।
हाँ, मतलब मैं वही रीएम्फसाइजिंग दैट ओनली कि मतलब आप ऐसा नहीं सोच सकते कि यार मैं तो 5 ही मीटिंग कर सकता हूँ, 5 मीटिंग में से 20% कन्वर्जन के हिसाब से एक मीटिंग सही होगी और मैं 20 दिन काम करूंगा और 20 दिन में भाई मैं 20 क्लाइंट क्लोज कर पाऊंगा। बट आपको तो उल्टा सोचना पड़ेगा ना कि अगर आपको 40 करने हैं तो यू हैव टू फिगर आउट अ वे टू एक्चुअली डू, और 20 दिन अगर आप काम कर रहे हो तो यू हैव टू फिगर आउट अ वे कि 20% अगर कन्वर्जन मार्जिन है तो आपको 5 की जगह 10 मीटिंग करनी पड़ेगी। हाउ विल यू डू दैट इज समथिंग यू हैव टू फिगर आउट।
अगर सेल्स मैनेजर ही रहना है तो ये आंसर सही है।
हाँ,
अगर उसके आगे बढ़ना है
हाँ,
तो आपको ये भी सोचना पड़ेगा कि मेरी कैपेसिटी अगर 20 मीटिंग की है तो मैं डबल कैसे करूँ ये नंबर। Should I find an agency which can do it for me? Should I find another person who I can hire as a freelancer to do it for me? You have to get creative, right? आगे बढ़ना है, अगर CBO बनना है, CBO cannot come back and say कि ये नंबर इतना ही हो सकता है क्योंकि बॉटम अप प्लान इतना ही बन रहा है। You have to have that stretch of 50, 60, 100% if you want, where you are able to create inorganic growth also, right? कि भाई ऑर्गेनिकली इतनी मीटिंग्स होती है मेरी टीम में, इतनी बैंडविड्थ है तो इतना गोल आ सकता है। बट देन
ऑर्गेनिक मतलब कि मैं कितना अपने आप हो सकता है,
भाई जो दिख रहा है, ऑर्गेनिक मतलब जो दिख रहा है आपको हो सकता है, you know that you already understand the path to that. Then there are things that you have to figure out during the year, and a great sales manager or any great professional will have 2 or 3 tricks up his sleeve to figure out what next can I do, what additional can I do that others are not doing so that I can get ahead in the game. And that could be as simple as for a sales manager hiring an agency or figuring out a data set which others don't have, or just figuring out another way to
but taking you back to a very entry level person, say for example there's somebody who's just begun working with an organization and they are doing sales, and I'm assuming a lot of sales becomes, like, why I'm saying sales becomes like a backbone of leading business eventually. I understand बहुत सारी other things come along and then it helps you become a successful head of business, but sales is like one of the backbones. Now किसी ने चालू किया, वो काम अच्छा कर रहा है, नंबर बना रहा है, अब वो ये तो कॉल नहीं ले पाएगा एक जूनियर या एंट्री लेवल, नॉट जूनियर बट एंट्री लेवल पर्सन कि मेरे को भाई ये एजेंसी के साथ करना है, ये करना है. What can they do so that they are successful in their first, say 2-3 years, 4 years of their professional life, according to you?
यार बहुत contextual है ये आंसर. It will depend on what kind of sales you are in. Right?
Okay.
And therefore, what are the industry practices where new hacks can be figured and all will be very, very contextual. I have, and I'll be apologetic here, I've done sales only in one domain, which is banking.
Right.
Baki sab has largely been partnerships and growth functions that I've headed. But whenever I've done this, I think planning helps like nothing else. Like if you can visualize your funnel well, and if you can plan for it in advance, then planning and forecasting works like nothing else. The one practice I have tried to build wherever I have taken a senior leadership role is that the team is looking ahead 2 months, 3 months. It starts with 1 month. जहाँ एकदम भी प्लानिंग प्रैक्टिस नहीं होती, एटलीस्ट 30 डेज का तो आपको पता होना चाहिए ना आप क्या करने वाले हो. गोल नहीं, आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट आप एक्शन क्या लेने वाले हो. सो इफ यू नो योर 30-day plan that these are the 10 things I have to do, and then you start stretching that 30 to 60 to 90 and say in the next 90 days if I did these 10 things correctly and regularly and consistently, then I know my 100-day goal will be met. And then you make that a cycle. Then I think you are better off than others. Now, creative hacks will differ from every industry to industry.
I think ये काफी अच्छा आंसर है, because I recall one discussion. Obviously, both of us know this person. I was discussing this with Miten once, and I was like, Miten, how do you make sure that you are successful in your work? And he said, look यार, अपन ना बहुत सारा काम कर रहे होते हैं और बहुत सारा काम क्वांटिफाई भी नहीं कर सकते, हमारा समय निकल जाता है उसमें. हैव अ वेरी क्लियर व्यू वीकली या क्वार्टर या मंथली या क्वार्टरली कि यार ये 15 चीज़ें या ये 5 चीज़ें, जितना छोटा टाइम फ्रेम होगा उतनी छोटी चीज़ें पकड़ो, ये 5 चीज़ों को मुझे करनी ही करनी. बिकॉज अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स व्हाट हैपेंस इज हम काम करते हैं, घर आते हैं, सोते हैं, उठ के अगले दिन चले जाते हैं, फिर रिपीट कर रहे होते हैं. एंड ट्रस्ट में बहुत सारे लोग ऐसा काम करते हैं जहाँ उनको पता ही नहीं होता यार 15 दिन निकल गए हमने किया क्या. बट आप वो 15 दिन को ना हर दिन में मत, यू शुडंट बी लिविंग एवरी डे एज अ डे कम्स अक्रॉस एंड देन गोज अवे, फिर चला जाएगा. आप ना एक टाइम फ्रेम पकड़ो, उसमें आप ये देखो कि यार ये मैं करता तो रहूँगा जो मैं करता हूँ, बट ये 3 चीज़ें मैं फोकस करूँगा. उससे क्या ना प्रायोरिटी डिफाइन होती है, और ऑब्वियसली यार आपको पता है कि आपको क्या चीज़ अचीव करनी है, तो आप वैसे भी वो 1 2 4 चीज़ें ना हाई प्रायोरिटी वाली डिफाइन कर लो, तो आप उसमें फोकस करोगे। एनीवे वो जो हम 80-20 रूल के बारे में बात कर रहे थे, अपने आप ज़्यादा फोकस कर पाओगे। डू यू एक्नॉलेज कि दैट इज अ गुड वे ऑफ थिंकिंग अबाउट इट? लाइक इवन इफ समबडी इज जूनियर बाय द वे और अ एंट्री लेवल गाय, एज आई वाज सेइंग, आप 25 काम कर रहे हो, आप चीज़ सीख भी रहे हो, एज यू सेड कि भाई क्रॉस फंक्शनल भी सीखो, ये नहीं कि आप प्रोडक्ट बेच रहे हो पर एक्चुअली देखो प्रोडक्ट बना कैसे है। प्रोडक्ट वालों से भी बात करो, मार्केटिंग वालों से बात करो, हो सकता है मार्केटिंग किस तरीके से प्लान कर रही है वो आप अभी उस डिसीजन मेकर नहीं बने हो, बट मार्केटिंग कर क्यों रही है, कैसे कर रही है वो भी समझ रहे हो। तो ये सब तो हो रहा है, बट एसेंशियली आपका एक नंबर है जो आपको अचीव करना है। उसके लिए आपको पता है कि 3 तरीके के हाउ टूज हैं कि यार ये ए तरीके का काम करूंगा तो ये नंबर इतना अचीव हो जाएगा, बी करूंगा, पर उसमें से डिफाइन कर लो कि ये 3 चीज़ें मैं करके ही, मतलब दीज आर द थिंग्स आई विल अचीव इन द नेक्स्ट वीक, ताकि यू आर एबल टू डू योर वर्क मच बेटर।
Yeah. Look, most functions across the organization in the really near future are operations. Hardcore execution. If your next 30-day plan is not clear to you and you don't know how exactly will you achieve your next 30 days goal, you've already failed. You're already behind your targets, right? And sales, that becomes more and more relevant because the measurement is so objective. Like marketing may still get away with some reasons, but sales तो बहुत clear है ना कि ये इतना नंबर आना चाहिए आपका इस महीने में. So depending on the industry, sometimes it's a quarter, sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's a week. But if you don't know whatever your closest cycle is, if you don't know what your outcome of that cycle is and what are the 10 things you have to do to achieve that outcome is already happened, you're already behind the curve. But therefore, what I keep telling my teams, depending on the cycle, is if you're cycle level 1, you are not 100% sure of your execution, यानी कि let's say 30 days, let's say 90 day की sales cycle है, तो 30 days तो 100% sure होना चाहिए. 60 days में मे बी आपका 70-80% श्योरिटी है, एंड 90 डे वाले प्लान में आपका शायद 50-60%.
ये थोड़ा एक एग्जांपल से बताओ ना कि मतलब ये 90 डेज सेल्स साइकिल, 30 डेज श्योर वाला, कुछ कोई एक एग्जांपल से बताओ.
So let's say credit card sales, right, where I started my career, and knowledge may be dated, but essentially the principle still applies. If I didn't know how my next month's number is going to come already, and I had not already done whatever I needed to do, and now I only need to track the next 30 days, then I'm already behind target. So next 30 days का नंबर तो एकदम क्लियर होना चाहिए कि मैं ऑलरेडी इंसेंटिव प्लान सेट कर चुका हूँ, मेरे को ऑलरेडी पता है कि ये एजेंसी से और मेरी ये मेहनत से ये नंबर आने वाला है, ये सब प्लान हो चुका है. नाउ ओनली एग्जीक्यूशन ऑफ दैट फॉर द नेक्स्ट 30 days I have to take care of, not the planning. But the remaining 60 days, I need to have a little more creativity in terms of there is still 20%, 30% that I have to figure out, because I have another 30 days to figure that out. And the 90-day plan from there, I can be a little more ambitious. So अभी टाइम है, 3 चीजें और ट्राई कर सकते हैं before I get there. Maybe one of them will crack and I can do even better than what I'm planning. So I'm saying you need to constantly revise this every month for the next 90 days with 30 days very clear, 60 days at a certain probability, and 90 days at a more ambitious goal. This cycle may change. If you're in B2B sales, it could become quarterly, and 2 quarters, 3 quarters could be your advanced version. And if you're in different cycles, you just adjust to those cycles, but the principle remains that your next milestone should be extremely clear to you in sales. And during that phase, that next cycle phase, every role in my mind, and I'm generalizing a bit and oversimplifying, it has to be about execution. And I think the mistake most people make, and especially the most intelligent people make, is that they will wing it. They will figure this out. But there isn't a better substitute that I have come across for planning hard. If you plan very well, your chances of failure are reduced and your predictability of outcome is very high. I'm not saying you can't achieve if you don't plan, but it's hard to fail with a plan in place. And obviously you'll always have factors that will come into play, so you need a little wriggle room to be able to adjust to those.
Makes sense, makes sense. So you were speaking that obviously sales is not entirely business. Business is like the superset, जिसका एक small portion है sales. मतलब small नहीं, मतलब important portion है sales. There are other things also, other aspects of overall how you think of business. What are the other aspects?
Yeah, look, sales is a very brick and mortar concept, right? Traditionally, जाके बेचना है.
Sales या revenue मतलब ऐसे.
Revenue. Yeah. I think as I said earlier, right, CBO का function is largely a growth function in the org. If you think growth is top line or number of units sold or the overall TPV or GMV, the total processed value or the merchandise value that you're generating as an org, if those are the functions that you need to do, then you need to look at both sides of the equation. One is कि मेरा sales कितना हो रहा है. Sales can happen either directly or through partnerships, right? So you have to be good at setting up partnerships, which are longer term, are able to create more displacement for the org. Then there is the revenue piece, where what you're selling, at what price are you selling it? The unit economics of that, right? How do you price it well? How do you market it well? Then that gets into influencing marketing a little bit. Is your org design and your incentive design right? Both from your internal team perspective and also from partnerships perspective. Sabka bhala ho raha hai ki nahi ho raha hai as the business is growing. Because if one incentive is out of place, then, or let's say overall incentives are not aligned, then you will have trouble aligning people and their goals, right? So therefore, as a CBO, if you're looking to build a business, you will need to operate at sales, revenue, marketing, product enablement and incentive alignment. So HR wale roles bhi aayenge, org design ka kaam bhi aata hai. So it's a more evolved role than just a sales, if you will.
And while we were discussing earlier about, say, somebody who's starting their career in either of these functions and eventually has the aspiration of leading business or doing or leading some sort of a penal function in an organization, obviously आप करके सीखोगे, which is one way of doing it, but then generally it's a slower way of compounding. What according to you could be other, more efficient ways of compounding? Like a lot of people do certifications. To be really honest and crude, a lot of people go to IIM and a lot of these courses are also certifications for a lot of people.
For the tag.
It's a means to an end कि मुझे जॉब चाहिए. अब वो जॉब में आ तो गए आप, मान लीजिए. अब आप IIM से हो तो शायद थोड़ी ज़्यादा अच्छी जगह जॉब चालू कर लोगे. कोई IIM से नहीं है तो थोड़ी सब ऑप्टिमल जगह चालू कर लेगा. Eventually that person can also do much better than somebody who's graduated from IIM. I think you will acknowledge that. But generally compound करना है लाइफ में. How do you think people can do that really well? And think of it like if somebody who's 20, 25 thinking about it, or even people who are in their college, they have an aspiration or a view of कि अच्छा यार तो नौकरी लगेगी, काम करेंगे, पर ग्रो कैसे करेंगे? क्योंकि just extending this point a little more, हम जब पढ़ रहे होते हैं ना, जब हम academics में होते हैं, हम हर साल कुछ नया पढ़ रहे होते हैं, हर साल कुछ नए 6, 7, 8, 10 सब्जेक्ट आते हैं, उनको सीखते हैं, कंपाउंड करते हैं बहुत फटाफट. लाइक पेस ऑफ कंपाउंडिंग इन एकेडमिक्स मच हायर. आप पढ़ नहीं रहे हो तो अलग बात है, बट आपके पास अपॉर्चुनिटी है. बट काम जब आप करते हो तो बहुत बार काम रिपीटेटिव होता है और उसको सीख के बेटर होने में टाइम लगता है. दस माई क्वेश्चन कि एकेडमिक्स से जब आप बाहर आते हो, अपना करियर चालू करते हो, हाउ कैन यू कंपाउंड फास्टर इन लाइफ सो दैट यू कैन से गो अप द प्रोफेशनल लैडर फास्टर? दैट कुड बी एन आउटकम. And generally, a lot of people are generally interested in learning a lot more, being more smarter. What are your hacks to actually do that well?
Yeah. So the hacks change depending on the career stage you are in. But let me start where I think I could have done better early in life had I known these things, right? One thing we do very well when we are students is documenting our knowledge, memorizing it, creating frameworks to remember it, right? चाहे वो chemistry का चार्ट ही बना के क्यों नहीं रखा हो आपने इक्वेशंस एंड वैलेंसीज का. बट आई एम सेइंग एज वी ग्रो इनटू आवर कॉर्पोरेट करियर्स वी फॉरगेट दैट व्हाट वी आर लर्निंग वी विल नॉट रिमेंबर 5 years फ्रॉम नाउ. एज अ प्रिंसिपल from experience you will have a gut measure of it, but you would not be able to visualize it or verbalize it better. So one thing I wish I had done more is documenting my knowledge and creating frameworks around it, saying how does this work generally? Does this framework replicate from one function to another or not? Now obviously you can do a lot of certification courses, you can do it for the tag or you can do it for the knowledge, and it will give you a good grounding of basic concepts, the right jargons, being able to talk the language that is supposed to be talked in each function. But what you will not learn there is the context from each org, the context of your own, how much do you get, what part better, and which one do you need to learn more about. I think curiosity therefore will not have any replacement, and the ability to then at a first principle basis write down things, make a framework out of it, test those frameworks over a period of time. I have seen great compounding coming from that, right? For example, if you were to start in sales and you understand funnels work great in sales, right? Planning works great in sales, and then you try and create another function or you join another function, are you able to test those concepts here as well and see if they apply?
But how do you test that while you're employed? Like हो सकता है ना आप वो दूसरी जगह पे काम ही नहीं कर रहे हैं, आपके काम में आप बाकी functions पे कैसे टेस्ट करोगे frameworks को?
So I'm not sure about the question, but let me try and
ठीक है, मतलब I can
let me try and restate this. Are you saying सेल्स में अगर फनल बनता है और 30, 60, 90 डे का प्लान बनता है, मार्केटिंग में नहीं बन सकता है अगर, तो देन हाउ डू यू अप्लाई दिस?
हाँ, मतलब एग्जैक्टली
आई एम सेइंग इफ इट्स नॉट अप्लाइंग देन यू हैव नॉट डिस्टिल्ड द फ्रेमवर्क इनफ. At a first principle basis, work is the same across departments on how you have to achieve success, how you have to get work done, right? It is in all roles in any org, there are, and this is my read, right? There are three principal areas that you should pay attention to.
Okay.
People. Do you know what their motivations are? Do you know who your key stakeholders are? Do you know how they are aligned to the goals that you are supposed to run with? Processes, which is about how is work getting done in the org, right? Which are the enabling processes which are compensating for trust deficit. For example, there are many orgs which are largely large orgs where there is a lot of maker-checker processes. Those are typically accounting for any compensating any trust deficit that's in the system, making sure that one's work is being checked by others. So knowing which process is an enabling process, which is a trust deficit process, evaluating processes on whether they are still relevant or entropy has kicked in and this process has just been there for a while and it needs to be changed. And the third piece is patterns. Do you understand how to recognize insights from numbers, see repetitive patterns in the org?
Connecting dots.
Connecting the dots. So if you are able to pay attention to people, processes and patterns in any role and apply at a first principle basis frameworks that you think work for them, then I think you will have great compounding in life. For me, that has worked well. I'm not saying it's universal truth, but I think my ability to, whenever I enter a new position, I initially go fairly slow. I would test out these three concepts, figure out what of my concepts still apply, which are new learnings that I need to have to be able to adjust my frameworks to this place or this new role, and then figure out if there is a way to become successful out of these three.
But out of these entire things, a lot of people might be great at managing people, for example, or generally getting work done from people. Process seekhna, product seekhna is obviously one more thing. Pattern recognition, you said. Of the three, what all can people actually learn? Like, कभी एक discussion में होता है ना कि यार ये तो natural ऐसा है. Like there are things which are natural in you, you will do well at it. Do you think all these three areas can be learned by people, or is it also an outcome of what you are anyway good at?
See, अच्छा question है काफी. And maybe I've not thought deeply about all three areas on what can be learned or not. I think patterns definitely can be learned. Some of it kicks in as you experience multiple different kinds of businesses. Processes, I think the org will teach you typically, because you will have to abide by the processes of the org. You can tweak them, but you need to first understand why something exists in the first place. And orgs typically do a very good job of inducting people into existing processes. And then letting them change it is about how flexible the org is. People part is the toughest, typically, right? And how you manage people, and it's typically when we think about managing people, we think about we being the manager and managing teams. I don't think that's entirely about people.
Agree.
Management. It's about managing your peers, it's about managing upwards, it's about managing external stakeholders, and also managing your teams, and also about managing yourself. I think how you manage people, I think comes from experience largely. Some are better at it than others, but I don't think it is something you cannot learn. It should
but I think ना मतलब थोड़ा सा disagreement है इसमें कि, और rather disagreement नहीं है, छोटा अलग point है. I think look, obviously experience will teach you all of this, but there are basic principles also you can follow in managing people. कि मतलब वो एक बहुत easy कहावत है, लोग उसको seriously शायद लेते नहीं है कि honesty is the best policy वाली जो एक line होती है, या झूठ मत बोलो. Like a lot of times you have a very short term view of what you want to get done with a person. And again, that person is not with a view कि आपकी टीम का बंदा है या बंदी है. They may be your colleagues also, they may be your seniors also, they may be external, internal stakeholders. झूठ मत बोलो. Even if that comes at the cost of you being looked at as inefficient or suboptimal, just come out clear every time so that you are not thinking short term with that person. Just think long term. I think this is something, if you recall, we have discussed in various discussions.
Yeah.
Just try and build really long-term relationship with any sort of person you are dealing with. और वो long-term relationship आप रखने के लिए ना, you will always take the optimal or choices while dealing with people. बस अगर ये भी आपने hack रखा, मेरे ख्याल से, you will become better at people management. मुझे लगता है बहुत सारे लोग ना people management थोड़ा mess up भी कर देते हैं, because वो अपना short-term output देख रहे हैं कि मेरा क्या फायदा है. Like वो बोलते हैं ना what's in it for me करके. And then you're not thinking of the incentives, the behaviors, the likes, dislikes of the other person you're dealing with. And then over time, the other person obviously figures out कि भाई ये तो he was making a fool of me or she was making a fool of me. And that's how you generally break that relationship. तो मुझे ये principle generally मैं personally follow करता हूँ कि यार बहुत आउटपुट लेके मत चलो, शॉर्ट टर्म व्यू मत रखो, लॉन्ग टर्म व्यू रखो. Like for example, now I know you for how many years, like at least 2-3 years now.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could probably sense it. I have always tried to have that relationship, and मैं बहुत one-to-one बात कर रहा हूँ कि I have always built with a view, can I call Vikas 10 years from today, even if we have not spoken for 10 years. अगर ये रिलेशनशिप मुझे बिल्ड करना है ना, तो मैं विकास से आज कैसे बात करूँ, मैं विकास से आज कैसे बिहेव करूँ, और अगर विकास की कोई बात मुझे खराब भी लग रही है तो मैं उसको रिस्पॉन्ड कैसे करूँ. बिकॉज अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स व्हाट ऑल्सो हैपन्स इज हम इतना कॉन्फ्रंटेशनल इकोसिस्टम में भी रह रहे हैं कि मतलब मुझे तुम्हारी बात पसंद नहीं आई तो भाई बाहर में जाओ. वैसे में नहीं जाना चाहिए. आई थिंक जस्ट ट्राई एंड सॉल्व पीपल, ट्राई एंड अंडरस्टैंड. एम्पैथी इज अ बिग थिंग विच यू कैन बिल्ड. I think those are the things, if you generally keep in mind in your conscious way of behaving and interacting with people, I think you will become better at people management. Would you agree?
Yeah. So I think the core principles हैं. There are some things you obviously in any relationship, and that's not specific to corporate. आप चाहे दोस्ती में कर रहे हो, घर पे कर रहे हो. I think there are some things that will always pay off, right? A longer term view always pays off. It's just that consciously लोग नहीं करते हैं इतना.
नहीं, मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ ना, जब ये सॉल्व करना है तो हाउ कैन यू कॉन्शियसली थिंक ऑफ कि यार अभी ऐसी सिचुएशन आई गई है. बिकॉज नॉट अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स, लाइक मुझे तो चलो अच्छा हुआ ना, मेरे को तो विकास का रिलेशनशिप रखना था. विकास हैज ऑल्सो नॉट बीन अ बैड पर्सन इन माई लाइफ. एनीवे आई वुड वांट टू बिल्ड रिलेशनशिप्स, लॉन्ग टर्म पीपल मैनेजमेंट विद गुड पीपल. बट कभी कभी खराब जनता भी आती है, आपको मैनेज करना होता है. देखो सेल्स में तो आती है,
which is perfectly the side I was going to do. Right? I'm saying your perspective typically should be about, and going back to that planning वाला example, right? Outcome ये है कि आज से 10 साल बाद भी मैं विकास को कॉल कर सकता हूँ, right? Without talking to him over 10 years. Can I build that trust with him? Input is what you do today to build that trust. And I think where most people lack is they don't know what to do today to build that trust. Everybody would want this, that for people I want to work with in the future, or I generally want to be in touch with, or those who I respect or like, I would love to be trusted by them, right?
Right.
Problem most of us make is we think trust and being liked is the same thing. Right? I don't think they are the same thing. And I think trust is a problem statement in general for people because they don't know how to really build it, how to actively build it. And what I have learned over the period is it's like between two people, no, it's like a network effect. The more the trust, the stronger it grows. But where to kickstart is the problem that most people have. So one hack I figured that works for me is if I figure that this is a gentleman or a woman that I want to work with on an ongoing basis, or I like how they do things and how I can learn from them, or in general we have a similar mindset about how to go about things, I would actually go and volunteer the trust from my side and actually make it very, very verbalized and specific. Saying that, look, here is how I work, this is my approach, I trust you, so I'm laying it on all my cards on the ground, and if it's a position where negotiation has to happen, I would do this. If it's not, if it's about working on the same side of the table, I would still have a one-on-one and made it known that I trust that other person. And now I also put it forth, saying I trust you as well, and it's for you to break it. Doing this actually puts one, trust on the table, saying this is something we share. That person can either tell you whether they trust you or not, or choose to not vocalize it. But it becomes now theirs to break. And you have already expressed it. So this, in a way, kickstarts that journey much faster. The second thing people often forget is having hard, honest conversations is a superpower.
हाँ, ये confrontation तो बहुत problem होती है लोगों को.
But confrontation नहीं होता है hard, honest conversation.
नहीं, मैं कह रहा हूँ confrontation चलो गलत.
People worry about confrontation when trying to have.
मतलब हाँ, probably they're preempting confrontation हो जाएगा तो बात ही नहीं करते.
Exactly. But I think one of the biggest trust building factor in my life has been having hard, honest conversations at the right time. If you are able to have that without bias, if you are able to have that with empathy, where you're not, it's not about blaming the other person or calling out a problem, right? It's about honestly putting things on a table and saying, this is difficult for us, we need to solve this. And if you're able to do that in a right way, nothing builds trust more than that, because then you know that everyone's raw and open in how they are talking about it. And the third, you yourself said, right? Empathy. I think putting yourselves in somebody else's shoes and being unbiased when you're judging them, and ideally don't judge, or when you're trying to assess them, or in general when you have a peer and you're trying to understand their motivations. The typical agenda is always whether I am benefiting from it or not, and therefore are they doing something to help me, versus why are they doing what they are doing and how are their motivations aligned. in an org, it is extremely difficult for everyone to do everything for each other, right? Because you have different objectives, different goals, different priorities.
Sometimes conflicting also.
So for you to be able to understand somebody else's position and motivation in a very non-judgmental manner and understand how the divergence comes is extremely relevant to finding common ground. Because they are feeling the same thing, that you are also divergent from what their goal is. And therefore bringing it out in the open helps. So that empathy, I think, helps you have these hard conversations, helps you put this trust on the table and say, it's a great way to hack trust, right? And I know people say trust can't be hacked, but I believe that if you do these 3-4 things early in a relationship, no matter which that relationship is, it just fast tracks how you build trust, or call it out in the open, bring it out in the open that there isn't enough trust in this relationship.
I think वही मतलब calling it out to the other person कि यार trust नहीं हो रहा है.
Yeah.
Probably you're not feeling it or you're not giving it because of some reason. I think generally discuss and generally from a professional standpoint, I think one thing which has brought a lot of clarity in my relationships with a lot of peers and people I work with is a hack which I didn't used to do earlier, and that hack is set up feedback discussions with people weekly, quarterly actually थोड़ा लंबा जाता है. The more frequent you work, the more frequent your feedback sessions should be. And when somebody is giving you feedback, आप ज्ञान मत दीजिए, चुपचाप सुनिए. Because feedback, as a lot of people say, मतलब लाइन पड़ी होती है, feedback is a gift, but वो gift ना तब तक ही मिलेगा जब तक आप उस पर ऐसे हाँ ही नहीं करोगे. आपको सोन पापड़ी के डब्बे मिलते रहेंगे अगर आप चुपचाप लेते रहोगे. जिस समय बोला अरे सोन पापड़ी ले आया, नेक्स्ट टाइम से कुछ भी नहीं लाएगा सामने वाला. So I think just setting up feedback catch up with your team, one-on-one with your peers and with your bosses as well, because उनके तो आप team हो. I think generally really helps, which a lot of people, by the way, I'm sure you would have seen it, a lot of people just don't do it at all. और उसके कारण फिर ट्रस्ट बिल्डिंग होती ही नहीं है. ये सेल्स में आई थिंक बहुत ज़्यादा होता होगा, या बिजनेस में बहुत ज़्यादा होगा. सेल्स बार बार बोल रहा हूँ मैं. आई थिंक मैं ही थोड़ा सा शैलो थॉट है मेरा बिजनेस को लेके. बट आई अंडरस्टैंड बिजनेस ऑब्वियसली इज एन आउटकम ऑफ मल्टीपल थिंग्स. रेवेन्यू आप बहुत सारी चीज़ें करने, अच्छी चीज़ें करने की बात करते हो. बट ये बिजनेस में आपको दिखता होगा कि लोग आके बोलते हैं यार हमारी बात ही नहीं, एंड में आपने बोला हमारा तो अप्रेजल ही खराब है, आपने पहले क्यों नहीं बोला. अरे ये डिस्कशन, फिर वो ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट क्रिएट होता है जो आप बोल रहे थे. पर आप हर हफ्ते, हर महीने, हर फोर्टनाइटली बात करोगे तो उसको भी फायदा है, आप भी क्लियरली बता पा रहे हो. आई थिंक ट्रस्ट डेवलप्स. वो रेवेन्यू नंबर हुए नहीं हुए, आई थिंक वो सेकंड ऑर्डर इफेक्ट है, बट ट्रस्ट भी डेवलप हो जाएगा.
आई थिंक सिर्फ फीडबैक ना हम लोग काफ़ी नेगेटिव वर्ड की तरह यूज़ करते हैं. टिपिकली लोगों को ये लगता है कि फीडबैक मतलब इंप्रूवमेंट एरियाज ही बता रहा है कोई. एंड ऑल्सो फीडबैक ऐसा लगता है कि इट्स ऑलवेज अबाउट अ फॉर्मल सिट डाउन, राइट? एंड आई थिंक द चैलेंज विद दैट अप्रोच टू फीडबैक इज दैट इट बिकम्स अ बिग थिंग for somebody to do, and therefore a lot of people avoid doing it very frequently. To me, if you are managing a team, or even let's say you're holding a charter which has a lot of stakeholders, right? Typically knowing where you stand and telling others where they stand is extremely important, because otherwise people don't know gap कितना expectation में और जो वो कर रहे हैं उसमें. अगर कोई ज़्यादा भी कर रहा है तो बताओ कि आप अच्छा कर रहे हो तो और क्या कर सकते हैं, becomes a discussion. But 2-3 things to know about feedback. One, if you're setting it up too frequently and you don't have enough to say, over a period of time it will lose its importance. So I do 2 things typically, at least in my teams. There is some feedback that is on the fly, and typically this feedback is about immediate mistakes or competency gaps that I see.
The operational issues.
Very objective feedback. It's about XYZ. अगर आप better करते तो ये outcome better आता. It's not about the person, it's really about the process, it's about the...
Which I think a lot of managers generally do.
Yeah, and I think this is easy to fix, and this is, if a manager is waiting for a formal feedback round to do this, then he's also delaying overall team ka efficiency ka compounding. So I think that is one thing that you should do. Feedback which is behavioral in nature needs a little more formal setup. If you do that on the fly, often that point will get missed in the details. So you have to sit down, you have to make sure you are clear and that person is clear, the message is getting across. One thing feedback does for everybody is it distills down different things. And you need time to be able to separate the emotion and the wrongdoing or the right doing from the actual behavior, right? You need to be able to point out what exact changes that individual can make in their day-to-day working or behavior to improve from here on. And I think that needs some thought, and that needs a structure to be able to sit down and give that feedback to the team or to your peer or senior. And while taking feedback, I think you were bang on. I don't think you should be responding to it instantly, but there is a superpower in asking clarifying questions. If you ask clarifying questions, examples, if you're able to actually call out things where you're not clear or you don't agree with, without sounding defensive, then it gives that other person an opportunity to clarify rather than you interpreting, right? Most of the resentment that happens during feedback is because of misunderstandings on whether or not I've actually understood. So feedback का purpose ही lost हो जाएगा if you don't really ask clarifying questions.
And plus आपने ये भी बोला ना कि यार feedback को हम negative देते हैं because a lot of times I think even पहली बात तो feedback करते ही नहीं जनता, और करती भी है तो negative feedback ही दे रही होती है. Like उनका उसका the feedback giver's perspective is also कि what can be an area of improvement.
Yes.
मैं कह रहा हूँ आप सिर्फ अगर नहीं समझ में आ रहा है, चमक नहीं रहेगा आपको कि क्या बोलना है फीडबैक में भी, एंड एज अ मैनेजर ऑल्सो थिंकिंग मोर फ्रॉम अ पर्सन परस्पेक्टिव और पीपल आर वर्किंग विद यू, दो तरीके के फीडबैक डिस्कशंस कर लो या ब्रेक कर लो. एक में सिर्फ आप अच्छा ही बात करो कि भाई व्हाट आर यू ग्रेट एट, गुड एट, और एक में फिर आप बात कर लो कि भाई दीज आर द थिंग्स विच वी फील इज, बिकॉज आई थिंक अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स it is generally, unfortunately, a discussion on the areas of improvement. But I think a good way of making people listen you better is start with a view that what they just tell them what they're great at.
I think the best, the best way to collect feedback, to give feedback, is to start by collecting it. I haven't had any conversation in my life where I have started with, can I get feedback from you? Where that person has not in reverse asked me, can you give me feedback as well?
नहीं, विच इज ट्रू, बट मैं ना उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट से बोल रहा हूँ कि ये बहुत सारे मैनेजर्स भी हैं. हमने देखो एक एंट्री लेवल एम्प्लॉय के बारे में सोचा है, बट एक मिड लेवल भी होते हैं. ठीक है, मिड लेवल में भी आपकी टीम है, आप उनके साथ फीडबैक सेशंस कर रहे हो. मैं उनके पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से बोल रहा हूँ कि आप सिर्फ वो वाला फीडबैक सेशन मत करो अपनी टीम के साथ जहाँ आप सिर्फ एरिया ऑफ इंप्रूवमेंट की बात कर रहे हो. मैं कह रहा हूँ जनरली अ पर्सन रिस्पॉन्ड्स बेटर व्हेन यू टॉक गुड फॉर देम टू बिगिन विद. अब उसके बाद बताओ भाई देख ये सब तो अच्छा हो रहा है कि यार आप ये सब अच्छा कर रही हो, बट ये गलत है, इसको थोड़ा ध्यान दे लो, तो लोग सुन लेंगे. पर सीधे ही ये गलत हो रहा है, इस पे ध्यान दो, तो मतलब फिर ज्ञान देने पे आ गया. मतलब then the receptiveness of what is coming across gets lost in the fact कि यार, या फिर ये presumption या ये सब conversion बन जाता है दिमाग में कि यार ये तो भाई कमियां निकालने के लिए आ गया. So I'm just trying to come out with the fact कि sometimes you have to be consciously talking good about people.
Yeah, I think consciously yes. I personally don't subscribe to doing separate sessions of good and...
मैं example दे रहा हूँ कि consciously सोचना.
But 100% I agree that you need to be able to speak on both sides and just a one-sided conversation, because if you are finding nothing good in somebody, then you've made a wrong hire or a wrong... So that needs to come out, saying I'm just not able to align to you and your ways of working. But otherwise, typically you would do both sides of the coin and let them know what they're doing well and should do more of, and what are the areas that you think they can improve better on, and ideally try and get from your side to a distilled version of what you think is the root cause of the problem without making assumptions. And where you're not clear, by the way, even as a manager, if you're not clear on what might be creating the problem, it's okay to ask, saying I'm seeing this happen repetitively, what do you think could be the problem, and have an honest conversation about what could be the challenges that individual is facing and how to improve that. But yeah, I 100% agree that feedback cannot be...
हाँ, मतलब हमने this brings me to one point where, you know, we've spoken a lot about people and how do you do that. And one of the things I've noticed while obviously you were at CRED, I was at CRED, I think most people I've seen, and I don't want to embarrass you, but a lot of people around me really like you.
Oh.
I'm from a professional setup, ठीक है? You might be a great cricketer, that's another reason for liking you. And आप बैटिंग करने देते हो बाकी लोगों को, टॉप ऑर्डर पे नहीं जाते हो क्योंकि फिर आउट ही नहीं होगा, हमारी बैटिंग नहीं आएगी, तो उस चक्कर में ऑल्सो पीपल लाइक यू. बट आई एम जस्ट सेइंग, ऑब्वियसली यू स्पोक अबाउट हाउ डू यू इंस्पायर पीपल, मैनेज पीपल. वन इज दैट मुझे आउटकम तो दिख रहा है एटलीस्ट आसपास कि यार सब लोग विकास की तारीफ करते हैं. व्हाट आर द की एस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ रियली इंस्पायरिंग, मैनेजिंग पीपल अराउंड यू, जिसका आउटकम ये हो सकता है दैट ऑल ऑफ देम रियली लाइक यू. एंड आई थिंक देन अ लॉट ऑफ दीज थिंग्स व्हिच वी वर डिस्कसिंग, फीडबैक देना लेना, ऑल ऑफ दैट बिकम बहुत ईजी हो जाता है. लाइक योर क्लोजेस्ट फ्रेंड कैन गिव यू वेरी इजीली विदाउट थिंकिंग फीडबैक, बिकॉज पता है यार प्यार है, ट्रस्ट है, दे बोथ ऑफ देम लाइक ईच अदर. So that's my question. What are the key aspects of really inspiring and managing teams? And teams could be your team, some other team which your business is dependent on. So just wanted to bring this point up.
I think first point is what you had mentioned, right? Do you always have a longer term in mind And day-to-day pressures of business often make you forget कि ये relationship भी important है, सिर्फ ये outcome important नहीं है. People always operate better and with more ownership if they understand why they are doing what they are doing. And very often, at least as managers and even sometimes at peers, we tend to ask people to do things for us because the job demands it. We don't see what is their benefit, we don't see how or what else are they working on, and we don't see how it can benefit them, right? So having that conversation alone is a brilliant hack in my mind to enable people or earn empathy of people, even if it's your own team, right? Earning their empathy is important. I think the second thing we often forget as managers is that roles are what the org has designed and defined for you, but people are people, right? So ये hierarchy word actually I don't like. I genuinely don't like. I don't like being called a boss or a sir because मुझे थोड़ा weird लगता है ये कि this is where I am because of the experience I have, because of the kind of role the org has entrusted me with. But each of us have our roles to play. And I think placing that on the table sometimes helps that, look, this is my job and that is yours and this is how we will work together. Third thing that works very well is laying out expectations on the table on how you work as an individual. New teams and especially inherited teams typically have a challenge where they've used to a certain way of working, right, and then a new person comes in and they have to adapt to that person's way of working. If you are a new manager who's inheriting a team, ideally start by adapting to them and then tell them how your way of working is and gradually move them towards you. I think forcing people to change because their manager has changed and changing their processes and habits is actually a short term maybe a good solve, but longer term a problem.
वो solve भी नहीं होगा ना कभी.
नहीं होता है, correct.
मतलब वो थोड़ा सामने वाला हाँ बोल देगा पर actually
changing it is very difficult for them, right? So operationally some of these hacks work. Nothing works like actually valuing people for what they are. Everybody has their personal story. The one thing that is common to all human beings is the need to be unique, right? So everybody wants to be unique and everybody wants to know what is in it for them. And your ability to inspire everybody from their context is important. It's not like a universal goal can inspire everyone. So that storytelling, that contextualization, that ability to explain how they will win and how they should progress should be it. And the last thing is, can't hold people tightly to yourselves, right? So there is encouragement often that I do, at least for my team, to look beyond the current role, right? It should never be कि ये मेरा team है तो यहाँ रहना चाहिए या अच्छा performer है तो यहाँ रहना चाहिए. In fact, the best of the performers, you should encourage them to look beyond the current role, look beyond this. Then you become their people rather than their manager. And I think therefore the longer term relationship kicks in, saying this guy is not worried about मैं इसके लिए क्या कर सकता हूँ. He's worried about मैं life में क्या कर सकता हूँ and therefore how to enable me better. And I think I go back to what you said, right? Longer term relationship over short term objectives is where you should operate on. Operate with trust, have hard conversations early in the relationship, be very empathetic. At the same time, no nonsense, right? You can't drivel with different things. Ki nonsense is also okay. A team is a team. A professional environment is a professional environment. There should be time to be a nonsensical set of people, which you park aside so that you can get to know each other a little better. But a work is work and job needs to be done well.
But talking about the job, sorry, मैं थोड़ा सा एक और चीज़ सोच रहा था कि talking of the job and obviously people management is a big thing, but at your level of or any person who's your peer who's a CXO, X being like CMO हो सकता है, CTO, CIO, obviously CBO. How does a day look like for say a CBO? Like a lot of people think about कि यार ठीक है मतलब चलो ये मैं decide किया कि इतना ये achieve करना है, सब करना है, but that's an activity you go through. जनरली AOPs करते हैं जो annual operating plans बनाते हैं या कुछ generally annual plans बनाते हैं, but generally दिन में करते क्या हैं मतलब CBOs, because look मैं CBOs को भी corner नहीं करना चाह रहा हूँ, probably you can give me a context of CBO. मैं generally CXOs की बात इसलिए कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि जनरली थोड़ा वो गाइडिंग लेवल पे होते हैं. देयर आर लॉट ऑफ पीपल हु आर एग्जीक्यूटिंग. तो डेली लेवल पे CXO करते क्या हैं?
मैं तो शायद रॉन्ग एग्जांपल हूँ इसका सेट, बिकॉज आई थिंक इन अ डे माय कॉन्टेक्स्ट स्विचेस फ्रॉम डिसाइडिंग इस क्लाइंट को डिस्काउंट कितना देना है राइट अप टू हमारा नेक्स्ट स्टेप क्या होना चाहिए एज एन ऑर्ग इन टर्म्स ऑफ अ न्यू प्रोडक्ट और अ न्यू स्ट्रैटेजी और अ न्यू पार्टनरशिप दैट वी आर लुकिंग. I think you divide your time, again going back to stage of org के हिसाब से. Large companies में typically आपका day structured होता है. right? Because your role is very defined, your next agendas are very defined. Smaller companies and let's say more unstable environment, it is a little more chaotic. The best thing you can do as a senior leader is typically have your approach to organizing this chaos better. Figuring out where your time is best spent depending on the context of the org. एक्चुअली क्या होता है ना, क्राइसिस बहुत सारे हीरोज बनाता है. तो क्राइसिस को अगर आप फाइट करते हो तो यू कैन बी अ हीरो, बट क्राइसिस को अगर आप एवर्ट करते हो तो हीरो कोई नहीं बनता है. लाइक दैट्स डे टू डे, दैट्स BAU. तो आई थिंक ऑन अ डे टू डे बेसिस इफ यू आस्क मी व्हाट इज द जॉब, इट इज अबाउट अवॉइडिंग क्राइसिसेस. इट्स अबाउट लुकिंग अराउंड द कॉर्नर, मेकिंग श्योर यू आर ऑन ट्रैक, your AOP is being managed well, your inputs are in place as we defined earlier. Making sure your ability to track those is strong, your ability to then tell people what else are they missing is great. And if this means sometimes going down to an absolute detail and fixing an MIS by giving instructions to people, then so be it. And sometimes it is as big as recognizing trends and saying, guys, we need to shift direction as an org completely. And this needs to be a new version of the product or new version of our positioning or new way of pricing our model or new country or geography that we need to get into, then it could be that.
But ये जो आपका जो new direction वाला point भी है, so that's not happening every day. मैं एक typical day इसलिए पूछ रहा हूँ कि मतलब a lot of people, look, most people are not CXOs in an organization. Think of an organization which has 1,000 people. 5-10 लोग होंगे CXO होंगे, बाकी 990 are generally वंडरिंग ये करते क्या है ये लोग. मतलब बिकॉज देखो बहुत बार ये भी डिस्कशन होता है, आई एम श्योर आपने सुना होगा, क्वेश्चन पूछना तो बहुत आसान है भाई, PPT देखना है इनको, ये करना है वो करना है. आई एम जस्ट थिंकिंग व्हाट इज, और रादर अनदर वे ऑफ पुटिंग इट इज अ लॉट ऑफ योर वर्क. ऑब्वियसली यू सेड वन इज जस्ट मैनेजिंग chaos, there are multiple things happening, and I think every CXO is not just taking care of or their own function, they are also collaborating with other CXOs. तो उनका कुछ भी काम अगर हो रहा है तो मेरे पे क्या इन्फ्लुएंस आएगा, दैट इज समथिंग यू आर मैनेजिंग, विच आई थिंक क्रिएट्स दैट chaos and you're managing it. But otherwise, is it also doing with a lot of just tracking, just really being disciplined about what you have figured, like you said 30, 60, 90 days वाला, just figuring कि भाई जो 30 days है वो are we on track? Is it primarily tracking?
I think tracking is something that the org should be good at doing in general. I don't think it is about a CXO only.
But generally, collectively, CXOs are managing whatever.
Being on the ball, right? Yeah, I think 100%. I think knowing exactly where your business is today and where it needs to be 30, 60, 90, 100 days or whatever those number of days ahead that you're planning, I think you need to be that person for sure, which is why I said one of the core skills is numbers and the ability to see patterns in what others may not be able to see. But I'm saying that tracking is probably a very, very late or lagging metric to be looking at.
True,
right?
Obviously.
So therefore, what you track becomes very important as a CBO. Should you be tracking numbers or should you be tracking what inputs go into making those numbers? And I think at least for me, what works better is if I know why my plan is what it is and I know what those inputs are going to be, then I would track the inputs and my discussions would be around the inputs so that I can actually influence the outcomes rather than just track the outcomes. So I think day to day, if you ask me, all my discussions, all my tracking will be about input metrics, making sure people are aligned around the same and incentivized to do the same. Right? One of the hacks of people management, if you have the right attitude, the right bandwidth and the right competency available, and still the org is not able to progress forward, it's usually about are they aligned around the same goals or not.
True.
And CBO's job or any CXO's job honestly becomes that in people management, saying, am I incentivizing everybody in the same way or towards the same goals? Are we looking in the same direction as an org or are we looking in different directions? And there is entropy in every org, right? What that means is you cannot let it be and hope people where they started in March or April is where they'll end in March in terms of are they all looking in the same direction. Often it changes, right? Priorities kick in, urgencies come in, different departments have different kind of crises that they have to avert. And therefore, sometimes the divergence starts happening. Your role as a CXO is also to make sure these divergences don't become too large before you control and bring people back again together.
Makes sense.
So identifying these patterns, saying, look, these two things are happening, which is steering the org in a different direction, and we need to bring it back. And those happens through day-to-day meetings, day-to-day input tracking, and then revising plans. Sometimes you're ahead of plan, sometimes you're behind. So identifying opportunities and saying, hey, we have an opportunity to make a jump now, and we probably underestimated our growth cycle. Let's make a jump, let's be faster. Are another things, right? So while we understand that we don't make these decisions on a day-to-day basis, what you track on a day-to-day basis will bring these decisions to your table.
This actually brings me to a thought I just had, that look, I think a typical day for a same CXO will also differ between two scenarios, where one scenario is if your team is really low talent density and the other is high talent density.
Yeah.
I think what high talent density does is you can then afford to be a senior who can prescribe upward delegation कि भाई तुम लोग करो, give them free hand, नहीं हो पाए तो मेरे पास आओ, बताओ, I'll solve it for you, I'll do, I'll move heaven and earth and ensure that it is done. बट जब लो टैलेंट डेंसिटी होती है तो आप हमेशा प्रिस्क्रिप्टिव होते हो उनके साथ, भाई ये करो ये करो ये करो, मैम आप ये कर लीजिए, एंड दैट इज रियली रियली एनर्जी कंज्यूमिंग. अब क्या होता है, एनर्जी कंज्यूमिंग है, आपकी सारी एनर्जी वहाँ चली जाती है, तो ऐसे सिनेरियो में आप कुछ सोच ही नहीं पाते, आपका बैंडविड्थ पूरा यूज हो जाता है. यहाँ पे बैंडविड्थ खुला हुआ होता है. तो आई थिंक, and I'm sure you would love to be in the scenario where you have high talent density under you or with your team. So the question I had was, given that you will pick that scenario, and most of us will, how do you hire good? How you hire better? क्योंकि देखो, hire में हमेशा एक तो विकास आप मानोगे, the promise, the expectation of a person joining. क्यों आपने बहुत अच्छे वो मतलब एलिजिबिलिटी क्राइटेरिया लगा लिए, लोग आ गए, ज्वाइन किया, बढ़िया लोग हायर करेंगे. Then say for example you finalized a person who's joined you as an employee, she joins you, आप एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं भाई ये तो आके धूम मचा देगी, बट जो वो एक्चुअल में होता है वो हमेशा एक्सपेक्टेशन से कम होता है. लाइक बहुत कम लोग होते हैं जो एकदम अलग ही निकलते हैं कि हमने तो बहुत हाई एक्सपेक्टेशन रखा था पर इन्होंने तो उसको भी तोड़ दिया. हाउ डू यू हायर बेटर?
I think you tend to remember always the 10% people who you hired bad as examples of what not to do again. But how do you keep hiring better is a compounding everybody needs to go through. I think for me, what has worked is the right kind of questions when you're talking to people, understanding the motivations of every individual, right? Is it about bonus, money, status, symbolically, what kind of org or brand they are working for? Or is it about the actual work? Is it about the actual outcome that they are able to have? Is it about the influence and impact that they can create? So what motivates a person? If you can find that well, I think that's one. And more often than not, getting down to what their life journey has been is a great example rather than just the work journey.
So there must be some things you are testing also, na? As 100%. Part of the process.
100%.
तो उसमें क्या टेस्ट कर रहे हो आप?
यार देखो, I test grit. I actually score grit above talent. I think if you have a very strong perseverance and persistence in life, and if you have shown that across different dimensions of life, not just work, and I think that's a great place where sports, family, hardships you have faced or how you have compounded in life, and what all hardships have you overcome in work also, or hurdles you've overcome in work also, is a great way to test somebody on their grit and to see how much of it came their way and how much of this they made happen is a great way, right? So persistence and grit, I think I score above talent, by the way. I think talent is something that sometimes you are able to test because of the pedigree, because of filters people have already seen in life, right? You asked about whether IIM is a great example. One of the things IIM served 20 years back when there was less professional courses available is a great filter for talent, right?
I think it's still true.
It's still true. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying now there are more filters that can qualify for talent, but I'm saying
it's a dumb filter कि भाई
yes.
5 लाख लोगों ने एग्जाम लिखा, ये टॉप 10,000 में आया, कुछ तो कहीं तो डिसिप्लिन दिखाया है ना.
Correct. So base aptitude is tested by you getting into a great college like this. Then the college itself shapes you a little better. So you're at least assured of hygiene hai, right? Hygiene hai, and therefore that person scores above another person sometimes when you're looking at a otherwise same set of attributes. Then comes the actual talent you have acquired during work. What kind of organizations, what kind of scale have you managed? What kind of reviews would you get if you were to do reference checks? Reference checks is a great hack, right? And if you do that right, I think you will get to know what kind of people you're hiring. And the third bit is grit and perseverance. To me, the fourth hack really is the reason for what they are joining this place. And it comes down to that motivation of what that individual's motivation is. What additional will they win out of this place, right? So I think talent is a bar that can keep going up in an org as long as you're looking. I know people don't like this, but as long as you're looking at your top 10 and bottom 10 very carefully, and you want to replace your bottom 10 almost on a regular basis, is one great way for an org to compound. It takes a few cycles, but after a few cycles, you will have an org which is high talent density, meritocracy oriented. But I think when you're hiring individuals, you can't look at this as a metric. So when you're hiring individuals, these are the attributes I would look for.
Yeah, that makes sense because look, I think one of the things I personally experienced when I moved from my banking experience to say credit, which was obviously my first experience to a startup. I'm sure look, मेरा bias है credit को लेके, but इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि और भी startups भी ऐसे ही काम करते होंगे. They must be better organizations also. Right now, I'm with an organization which is equally good. I think the first changeover which I experienced was if you work at high talent density place, first of all, the meaning of manager, being managed, all of that goes away. Everybody is collaborative. Everybody shows really high leadership and ownership. And accountability अपने metric को ले नहीं, अपने organization को लेकर करते हैं लोग. Like it's not कि अगर मैं ops का part भी हूँ and you are part of say sales or revenue or growth, I will still be interested in your success. You will be interested in my success because honestly, all of us are having a clear, north star for the organization success. तो ऐसी जगह पे जाके ना आपको फिर चैलेंजिंग हो जाता है कि नाउ व्हेन यू हायर, ऐसी जनता मिलती तो है नहीं आसानी से. Like let's be honest, इतना talent density which we have experienced at least in couple of our organization, I'm sure you will also acknowledge बहुत talent density नहीं था. बहुत जगह जरूरत भी नहीं होती, let's be honest. बहुत जगह ये है कि भाई आपको सिर्फ वो ग्लास पानी उठा के यहाँ से यहाँ रखना है, इसमें कोई ज़्यादा ज्ञान लगाने की जरूरत नहीं है. यू एक्चुअली डोंट वांट पीपल टू बी रीइन्वेंटिंग दिस कि भाई पानी कैसे डालना है ग्लास में. But when you get into a place which is high talent density, it becomes challenging to hire. And thus my question was ki, how do you hire ensuring that the bar is at least maintained or pushed higher?
Yeah, I think it cuts both ways. High talent is hard to hire and hard to retain because they'll always have more opportunity, right? And also hard to motivate, right? And because a seriously talented individual will have more lofty goals than an org can always subscribe to. So the org has to be a competent org enough to absorb their motivation, their ambition, and keep them going at it. So I think it cuts both ways. And I think you need to aspire to be an org that high talent wants to join. There isn't a better hack than that to attract to the right kind of talent. And if you set your culture right, if you set those practices right, and you hire the first few seriously talented people, it will start attracting more, right? High talent will gravitate towards a place that rewards high talent more. So look for compounding, look for persistence and grit, look for the light filters, look for good references, look for what is their motivation to join, look for how curious are they about what they will be doing and how they will be doing it. Look for how many challenges do they throw your way, as even in the interview process, right? Are they asking you difficult questions, which at least signal somebody who's thinking.
I think ये तो ना बहुत important चीज़ है विकास, आप जो बोल रहे हो. I think people really underplay it and this is the easiest hack.
Yeah.
Just prepare for an interview यार. A lot of people are really comfortable in the job they have done. उसके वजह से बोलते हैं यार इंटरव्यू तो कर लेंगे. यार I agree तुम्हें बात करना आ गया. I agree तुम्हारे काम से related कुछ भी क्वेश्चन हो तुम बोल दोगे. But just prepare for the organization you're joining.
Yeah.
The best question which comes up in an interview is when the interviewer asks you, do you have a question for me? वो मेक और ब्रेक क्वेश्चन हो सकता है. आप कितना डिटेल डीप क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हो. लोग कहते हैं नो आई एम फाइन, आई विल गेट बैक टू यू. मुझे लगता है भाई यू जस्ट लॉस्ट द इंटरव्यू देयर. जनता इस अपॉर्चुनिटी का यूज ही नहीं करती है और करती भी तो बहुत अंडरप्ले करती है. हाँ मतलब बहुत ऐसे कि अच्छा मतलब जनता बहुत बार ना ऑपरेशनल क्वेश्चन पूछेगी, तुम एचआर से पूछ सकते हो यार. लाइक अगर से फॉर एग्जाम्पल यू आर गेटिंग हायर्ड फॉर अ बिजनेस रोल फॉर दैट मैटर, मैं तो बल्कि जस्ट पुटिंग इट आउट कि भाई कल को अगर कोई आपके साथ भी इंटरव्यू कर रहा है यार, यू आर गेटिंग अ चांस टू टॉक टू अ बिजनेस हेड ऑफ एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, जस्ट आस्क गुड क्वेश्चंस. अब आप कोई कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी के कारण आंसर ना दे पाओ अलग बात है, पर आप क्वेश्चन तो पूछो. लोग क्वेश्चन ही नहीं पूछते. एंड आई एम श्योर इवन इफ यू कांट आंसर द और गिव अवे कॉन्फिडेंशियल इन्फॉर्मेशन, यू विल अप्रिशिएट कि इतना डिटेल और डीप सोचा था तुमने. आई थिंक वो भी काफी मेक और ब्रेक होगा. वोंट यू एग्री?
Yeah, and I think it doesn't always need to be a very super intelligent question. I think what it has to
signify deeper सोच लो ना.
Exactly. What it signifies, are you curious enough to go a layer below? Right? It doesn't have to be something that the interviewer doesn't know. You don't have to stump an interviewer, but are you asking something that signifies you are thinking beyond the obvious? And I think that needs to become very.
Because देखो आप इंटरव्यू में ना आंसर दे रहे हो. Generally, as a person who's getting interviewed, while asking a question also you're giving an answer.
Yeah.
People forget the fact. That question, ask me if you have any questions. When somebody asks, that question itself is giving me an answer कि तुम कितना इंटरेस्टेड हो, कितना क्यूरियस हो, कितना डीपली इंटरेस्टेड हो इस अपॉर्चुनिटी को लेके या इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को लेके. आई थिंक वो जनता बहुत, मेरे को बहुत दुख है यार, लोग इसको डिटेल्स.
ये फ्रॉम अ डिफरेंट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, राइट? I actually think an interview format where there is only Q&A and there's one person asking questions, the others accountable for answering them, is not the best way to hire.
I completely agree.
I think it's when it becomes a proper conversation, right? When you're talking as two people and that person's now comfortable enough to genuinely give their point of view.
मैं विकास आपको बताता हूँ, when we used to do a lot of interviews at Cred for sure, और उसके बाद से मुझे आदत हो गई है, बिकॉज यू आर रियली चेकिंग फॉर कपल ऑफ दीज बेसिक थिंग्स लाइक फर्स्ट प्रिंसिपल थिंकिंग है कि नहीं, एम्पैथी है, स्ट्रगल किया है क्या लाइफ में, स्ट्रगल करके हैव यू कम थ्रू इट, लाइक द मल्टीपल थिंग्स यू कैन चेक दैट थ्रू. वी यूज्ड टू सेट 30 मिनट्स का टाइम सेट. मैंने बोला भाई मेरा 1.5 घंटे का सेट करो. मुझे इसमें नहीं चक्कर में पड़ने, मतलब देयर इज नॉट सेट क्वेश्चंस की टेम्पलेट में आंसर भरवा रहा हूँ. आई रियली नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड, because at the end of the day, if I am the interviewer, I immediately, if I am trying to hire you, I become your evangelist internally for your candidature. कि भाई मैंने एक ऋषि करके बंदे का लिया विकास, उसको आपको हायर करना चाहिए. तो उसके लिए मुझे ऋषि को समझना इंपॉर्टेंट है ना. उसके लिए अगर मैं किसी सपना करके लड़की से बात कर रहा हूँ तो सपना को समझना इंपॉर्टेंट है. मैं 4 क्वेश्चन में नहीं समझ सकता हूँ. तो मुझे तो बिल्कुल लगता है कि यू नीड टू हैव. मैं बहुत बार पता है क्या करता हूँ, शायद मैं कभी कभी सोचता हूँ मैं इनएफिशिएंट हूँ, मैं लोगों के साथ इंटरव्यू खत्म ही नहीं करता हूँ. बोलता हूँ आई थिंक यू आर टायर्ड, आई एम टायर्ड, लेट्स कनेक्ट अगेन, बट हैव अ व्यू. क्योंकि देखो मैं एक और चीज़ सोचता हूँ ना, जब कोई इंटरव्यू दे रहा है ना विकास, अब हम बातें कर सकते हैं, आप एक सीनियर लीडर हो, मैं भी डिसेंट मिड सीनियर तो हुई, कि सामने वाला जो अपने को इंटरव्यू दे रहा है ना, वो बहुत उम्मीदों के साथ आ रहा है. आप प्लीज गिव देम द गुड स्पेस, quality, time wise, quantity wise, so that they can express their candidature really well. A lot of times, in the wake of getting a lot done, we generally underplay the fact and miss the empathy point of the person who's come for an interview. I think a lot of CXOs I've seen miss this point also. I don't know, matlab, this is not a question, I was just sharing my thought.
Yeah, I'm caught in between this. I think there are sometimes decisions I made in 10 minutes that this is a guy I want to hire.
वो तो क्लिक होने वाली बात है ना, बट आपने कमिट तो किया ना.
But there are some times where I have given half an hour and realized that this is not something I want to spend more time on, and it's okay to call that out.
But विकास, मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि आप टाइम दो, क्वालिटी एंड क्वांटिटी दोनों दो. उसके बाद डिसीजन आप जल्दी भी आ सकता है, आपका लेट भी आ सकता है, बट टाइम कंस्ट्रेंट के कारण या आपके इंटरव्यूइंग मैकेनिज्म के कारण किसी का मतलब उस दैट शुडंट बी अ कंस्ट्रेंट फॉर यू टू डू अ बेटर जॉब एट हायरिंग somebody or somebody, right?
Let me flip this around and ask you a question, right?
बोलो ना.
What are some of the questions that you think help you evaluate or make up your mind about somebody? Like what are some of your hack questions in interview?
यार एक तो मैं बहुत इजी क्वेश्चन पूछता हूँ कि सब लोग पढ़ाई कर रहे थे, आप जैसे हम बात कर रहे थे कि आप कंपाउंड हो रहे थे, how have you compounded in your life outside of your work post completing academics? अगर बहुत सारी जनता को ना क्वेश्चन ही नहीं चमकता अगर, तो आई थिंक दैट इज स्टेप 1. स्टेज 2 इज अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल हु टेल मी कि ये क्वेश्चंस जो है कि मतलब उसको इस तरीके से आंसर देंगे, मैं बुक्स पढ़ता हूँ, ये करता हूँ, वो करता हूँ, उसमें ना एक सेंस ऑफ कंपाउंडिंग दिख जाती है या फर्स्ट प्रिंसिपल थिंकिंग दिख जाती है उनके आंसर्स में. तो ये एक मेरा हैक क्वेश्चन है. अनदर क्वेश्चन आई हैव can't think of another thing, but this is like a very basic question I ask. How do you compound post your academics? Generally, what are your hacks? So generally people speak about that. So one of the other things which I also had in mind was, I think a lot of people who, and this is, you know, मैं थोड़ा सा I'm, you know, keep bringing you back to how young folks should think about it. Initially we spoke about कि how can they prepare themselves better, can they compound, there are ways to, certification कर सकते हैं वो. But those are success पे कैसे focus करना है. But you've seen a lot of people, you've obviously gone through the grind, 20, 22, 24 years experience, whatever now you have. 20 years तो for sure.
नहीं बढ़ाते जाओ.
नहीं 20 चलो 20 पकड़ लेते हैं. But my point is, you would be hiring a lot of people who are anyway joining new. But a lot of them, for them might be their first or second job. Now academic life is very different. Your work life is very different. What are the common mistakes a lot of young folks do, which they probably can just, you know, based on your experience, learn from? कि यार इन चीज़ों का ध्यान रखो, ये चीज़ें थोड़ा अवॉइड करो. Can there be some misconceptions you can break about general professional life or things people can generally avoid. Because look, I think our discussion today was also largely centered around what does a CXO do, what does a CBO do, business क्या है, sales क्या है. हमने बहुत jargons की बात करी, कहीं GMV, TPV की बात करी, कहीं पे हमने pipeline की बात करी, बहुत सारी चीज़ें बात करी. But एक नए you're young, नया क्या बोल रहा हूँ मैं, young professional who's starting, what are the misconceptions or mistakes they can avoid?
See, college is a very controlled environment. College or school or any professional course also is a very controlled environment. You have a very clear set of things to do. And you know what you need to study and therefore what the questions will be largely. I'm not saying in all, so a lot of these professional formats of studies today obviously create more chaos than used to exist. But you're not taught to think on your feet. You're also taught to win against each other. Right? So I think when you get into a career mode, 3-4 things change. A, you're on your own. There is no syllabus that you can follow. There are obviously processes and org will tell you about, but there are no syllabuses. B, you're not supposed to just win against each other. There is a goal line that you have to cross. And sometimes that goal line is not a very prescribed one or a very clear one. There isn't one goal to achieve. There are 5 or 6 KRAs, multiple different impressions to create, multiple stuff to solve for. And the external environment's not always in your control. So I think the 1-2 mistakes people always made early on in their career, I made, is I thought somebody will tell me how to do my job. And most orgs will not do that. They'll tell you what to do, they'll not tell you how to do it. And that's up to you. Second, I thought I have to win from the other person running by my side. And I realized very soon that that's not the case. Unless I win on my own and also win in a group, I am not moving ahead. The third problem, I thought there will be a playbook for every role I took. Like there must be some best practices in every.
वो तो exist नहीं करते.
कोई exist नहीं करता. Especially, I think in more mature economies and more mature industries, there are still ways of working that exist. But I think in the kind of industries I worked in India, में greenfield loyalty and consulting and all, very little playbooks exist. And I think the overall mistake we make is we believe that compounding will come out of continuing to work. It doesn't. It comes from reflection. It comes by sitting and understanding what you're doing, what worked, what didn't, and how will you change it the next time you're doing it. And last mistake I think most of us do after we get disillusioned by all of this is you have to either wing it or you have to do it alone. You don't have to. You can find great mentors. You can find great friends within a workplace also. You just need to look right and you just need to build the right relationships in time. And therefore I think if you are able to transition from college life to work life and keep these in mind that these things will change. It's no longer, what is the term they use, relative grading, right? And it is absolute also. And I'm not saying relative grading goes away in life, but it's absolute also. I think you need to have that. And then there are very short-term and very long-term goals you need to focus on. A career is a long-term goal, a KRA is a very short-term goal to be more precise. And therefore you need to have balance in both, right? What's helping you achieve your goal of tomorrow versus what can help you achieve your goal 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line could be very different. So consistently compounding and building towards that long-term goal is something not everyone actively or deliberately does. I drifted a lot in my life before I found a little better control. And I think I can learn a lot more today than I should have. And I think networking is something every individual should do when they start off. In college, you make friends because you are part of the same group, right? There is a sense of belonging that exists. That doesn't in a corporate. You'll jump from corporates to corporates. You need to be able to open up and make friends and carry those relationships. And I think
even if you are part of the same company for a long time, आपका network internal बना रह जाएगा. External बनाने में आपको थोड़ा you have to be proactive about it.
So you have to be a little, exactly, that's the word, right? You have to be a little more deliberate about your success than just following a clear set of how-tos.
But how do you network well? Like, and I'm sure, look, I'm not trying to be, obviously there's no playbook, नहीं तो सभी का network बहुत होता मतलब. And network is not about adding 20,000 people on LinkedIn or having a lot of people add on to a social media. I'm sure college से निकलोगे आप तो आपके पास बहुत सारे दोस्त होंगे सबसे पहले आपका network का part होंगे वो तो already network था. How do you network well? And secondly, I think obviously I believe that network generally helps you, but when you are eventually going on to become or want to exceed in the business side of your organization, how important is network building?
Oh, I think I cannot overemphasize the importance of network building, both from getting work done on a day-to-day basis and from building your own career in a very, very long-term basis. I wish I had great advice for youngsters on how to build a network, but I wasn't myself great at this. I wish I knew the hacks early on in my career, but I wasn't. I actually focused more on doing my work well rather than also building a network. And I think that was a very, very one-dimensional, unidimensional view of
वो हमारी culturally upbringing में भी है ना अपना काम ढंग से करो.
Yeah. So I think one things I've learned about networking, right? I think it has to be more organic than inorganic. You cannot start when you need somebody, and it's a very obvious one. You need to be predisposed towards talking to people and liking people, and it doesn't need to be a very wide network, right? Sometimes, and people like me, and I'm traditionally an introvert by definition of it, but my role demands extroversion of some sort. Now I focus on making sure that anyone I am focusing on from a long-term perspective, I am not shortchanging them for my immediate term goals. And that over a period of time, and I have told you about how I build trust with people and fast track that trust, how I make sure that I'm thinking long term about it. And yes, reaching out to new people is harder for someone like me, but if it's not harder for you or somebody else who's looking at this, I think you should go for it. You meet X number of people, you like maybe some of them, and some will become great friends and networks, right? So I think a great way to build networks is to think of them as strong friendships, acquaintances which you like to talk to, mentors who you want to ping whenever you need advice, industry experts who are available and would like to share their advice with you, and you should have some people in each of these buckets, right? And those strong friends is where your personal likeness or personal relatability comes into play. Everywhere else, it could be very, very work related.
Oh, you'll find your tribe also now.
You have to find
that way. But you spoke about mentorship couple of times. How do you find a mentor in life? Like really young folks might get awed by a lot of people who've done really well, and for a lot of people, done really well could be attributed to the designation they're at or the money they've made. But they might not be the greatest people. Generally, आप third person point of view से देखोगे कि इनके लिए यार ये mentor better नहीं है. Somebody else can be one. But everybody's trying to fetch their own mentor, and it's a two-way relationship. I might want to be your mentee, but you might not want to be my mentor. How does a young person figure and find a mentor?
Yeah, I think look for people who you admire and who are in your immediate vicinity, like who can be in touch with you. I think having mentors you don't talk to often is not very helpful. Having mentors who can give you operational advice, also not very helpful. That's a manager, right? Who can tell you how to do your job better. If you're looking for career mentors, then look at what kind of roles you want to be at. Look at people who you admire there, and it's actually okay to cold call people, talk to them, explore relationships, and then figure out who wants to be and who can be a good mentor. Not everybody who's good at their job needs to be a great mentor, right? The mentoring itself is a fairly hard task to do. So look for people who you believe you'll be able to relate to also. But I think there is no better hack actually than meeting 5 people and deciding who needs to be a mentor. And you need to take this seriously. Mentoring is not something that somebody is obliging you for, right? And it needs to be a two-way street. That when somebody is mentoring you, you should be open to that entire process as well. But you need to make sure that person is a mentor that you would like to have, right? And if you don't really find that, it's okay to change it and move on to a different mentor. I have had different mentors at different stages in my career. One of the first people who was my mentor was my immediate boss. He taught me how sales works, right? I was completely green when I went into ICICI Bank and I was handed off to sales team in the north. And north can be very difficult as a market in sales, especially.
Let's say it's very different.
Very different.
Diff se bolenge to kuch.
Because you come from the north. But for somebody who's never had extrovert bone in the body, going and trying to sell to agencies who are run by 45, 50-year-olds who are seasoned professionals and have done sales for years, right? And me going and telling them how to do their job was a difficult thing. So I needed to know how to run these ropes. And the boss I had, while he challenged me a lot, also taught me how exactly the ropes work. He almost put me undercover in sales and for 3-4 months made me learn how the ropes work, right? And that was great mentoring for me on how to induct a new individual, how to teach them the ropes, how that in the long run will help them respect the boss also. Like those 3 months I hated that individual because he made me go through what he made me go through. But now everything I know about sales, I owe to that person, right? So sometimes your immediate boss can be your mentor. Sometimes a business head who's not talking to you day-to-day basis, but if you can find those snippets of information and then validate those in your life will become a mentor. And at a different stage, different people play different roles. In consulting, I remember I reached out to one of the partners in the US and told them that you are the industry expert and I know I need a mentor to guide me through the consulting role. And I know we won't be able to talk every week, but I will set up a formal touch point with you every month. Will you be my mentor? It was as blatant and obvious as that. The one thing consulting taught me is that if you are very, very obvious about your networking effort, it's okay. Like सामने वाले को भी पता होना चाहिए कि भाई आपको भी ज़रूरत है और नेटवर्किंग कर रहे हो आप. ज़रूरी नहीं है हमेशा ऑर्गेनिक होती है नेटवर्किंग. You can be very in the face and inorganic about it. And in consulting, it was very welcome. So I reached out. He said he didn't have the time. But he connected me to 10 other people who were equally good mentors.
मैं यही बोलने लगा, this is also a great way of getting hired. Well, तुम सीधे किसी से जाके बोलोगे कि like you might get a chance to probably talk to some really senior industry person. बोलो सब job दे दो. तो वो that will not work out.
It's the wrong question to ask.
हाँ मतलब then you build that relationship. It could be a mentor relationship. Anyway, that person is a senior person in the industry. You will anyway get to learn from them.
Absolutely.
And once you become a mentor yourself, I think you then also get invested in the mentee's success. And वो नहीं भी पूछ रहे होंगे या पूछ रही होगी, you will still try and solve for it.
100%.
So
there is no downside to asking for advice from somebody who's ahead of you in the career graph or in the industry or in the overall vertical that you want to be in. There's no downside to asking advice. You can always choose to discard it if you don't agree or like the advice that you get. But asking for advice is a great hack to start having a mentoring conversation with somebody.
By the way, last question. Generally, sales में salaries बहुत अच्छी मिलती हैं. Is business sales roles one of the most sought after things people should or people generally look after?
Yeah, I think none of the sales people agree with you.
नहीं वो ठीक है.
Including
because I'm just saying, like obviously we keep hearing मतलब sales team, people who do well in sales.
Yes.
Generally well in life. Is it something people should focus on? Because by the way, a lot of young folks might not be very clear अच्छा करना क्या है. It's also a place you explore because you said, look, business is not just sales. Business is also about talking and learning about product, marketing, process, sales obviously, and then also thinking short term, really long term. Apart from the compounding nature of this work, generally it is very lucrative as well. Would you agree?
I think for a good performer, every role is lucrative, right? I think engineering roles, product roles pay sometimes far more than sales roles. But if you're in a sales org, if you're looking to join sales org, ideally always join the mouth, not the tail, right? Which means that...
What do you mean by that?
Basically where the consumption is, right? The org is looking to grow always. It's not looking to chase its own tail. It's looking to consume further. So if you're joining the mouth of the org, which is the top of the funnel, where you're building sales, you're bringing in more revenue functions get rewarded more handsomely and in the short term more than let's say an operations or a risk function. And
उनका output भी समझ में ज़्यादा जल्दी आ जाता है ना.
It's also very objectively measured. But if I were a young person trying to start a career, I would not join sales just for the money. Money will flow, right?
पर स्टार्टिंग में सबको मनी दिखता है ना.
तो गलत है ना, मतलब मैं तो कह रहा हूँ वहीं गलती हो गई. मनी तो हमेशा आना ही है बाद में. स्टार्टिंग में तो लर्निंग देखनी चाहिए. And I know this is a cliche. बट
नहीं, पर ये लक्ष्य में बहुत अच्छा डायलॉग है कि भाई खास काटने वाला बनो बट बढ़िया काटो तभी सही है.
हाँ, बढ़िया काटो तभी सही है. आई थिंक सेल्स में बाकी की लर्निंग बहुत स्ट्रांग है एक्चुअली. तो सेल्स इज वन रोल विच कैन ब्रिंग बोथ इफ यू आर गुड एट योर जॉब. बट जो पीपल स्किल्स आएंगी सेल्स से, जो नंबर चेजिंग स्किल्स आएंगी स्किल्स से, जो प्रेशर हैंडलिंग स्किल्स आएंगे सेल्स से, दोज आर वेरी वेरी रेप्लिकेबल इन एनी रोल, राइट? एंड नॉट एवरी रोल टीचेज यू अ ग्रेट डील ऑफ दिस. सो आई थिंक फोकस ऑन दैट एज वेल. And if you're looking to join sales, join an org which is very good at sales, right? Joining a very, and I know this is counterintuitive advice, if you're looking to be good in a function, join a place which has defined that function well and has done that over years. If you're looking to get very cross-functional exposure, join a startup, right? The problem is we sometimes want functional expertise but join a startup. Startup does not give you functional expertise. Startup wants to leverage your functional expertise or the general nature of your ability to do work well. Functional expertise will come from orgs which are deep and have defined functions much, much sharper. You're learning the ropes. A large org is a great place to learn the ropes because they'll put you through the grind. Like there isn't any other, like these large FMCG companies, right? Sales से बढ़िया grounding नहीं है. Telcos, large FMCGs, now banks. They have defined this function to the T. They have defined exactly the funnel. There is essentially a playbook for you to go and induct and learn on. So a great transition from college, right? You have some syllabus to cover at least. You join a startup, you're on your own. So please join a startup if you can handle chaos, organize chaos, and you want to do more than just one function. And both are equally rewarding, but different choices to make.
मेरे को तो ये सुनाई दे रहा है, probability of becoming a CEO at an organization is higher अगर आप business कर रहे हो.
यार CEO बनना है कि नहीं बनना है ये सोच लो पहले. बट यार
देखो बहुत सारी जनता को बनना है. I think it's a very, very, very challenging
roles which give you a wider exposure, more people management exposure, more strategy thinking and execution control exposure are great hacks to becoming CXOs and CEOs of the world. Yeah.
Although मैंने बोला था कि मेरा last question था वो, तो मैं इसको rephrase कर लेता हूँ. I think one of the things, and I hope by the way, thanks a lot for doing this today. I hope you enjoyed.
Yeah.
मतलब ऐसे random कुछ मैंने पूछा नहीं जो आपको you were put in a spot, ऐसा तो कुछ नहीं.
No,
I think this was right back in your alley. मतलब I just wanted to understand more about what you do, what a CBO does, what CXOs generally, what their life look like. Obviously we see the flash around it, but the struggle and the things they do in life is something which I really wanted to understand. So first of all, thanks a lot for doing this. The thing which I wanted to ask is more like a favor and a recommendation. If you enjoyed, can you suggest me 3 people in your network who should, in your opinion, come on the show, and probably we should explore such things with them?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Do you do this physically only, or you're open to doing this virtually also?
आप recommend तो करो, हम चले जाएंगे उनके पास.
I think one of my ex-bosses, Manish from Jet Privilege, he was the CEO, MD and CEO of Jet Privilege. He's one individual you should definitely get in touch with. I think very operator mindset, very, very clear about goal setting and getting his goals done, and very, very strategic in connecting the dots. I think a great guy to talk to, and he'll have a great opinion on all the questions you're asking. I think Rahul is another individual. I think you're already reaching out maybe. I think that's another person. I've learned a lot about people management and cultural values from Rahul. I think he's helped me put down words to things I was doing already, and also taught me quite a few new things. And I like how he operates. I think that's the other person. And if you're only looking for senior people, then I can recommend a few more names. I think
anybody you think will come on, add value to people generally. Look, my idea is to explore and discuss with people who have executed, gone through the grind.
Yeah.
Not just talk about vision, but actually executing it. Like, there are visionaries, and I respect them. But then at the end of the day, they might not be great at executing it. There are great leaders who are great at executing. And thus, they can be anywhere in the entire hierarchy if there is any. And thus, it's not very important for me to really only talk to really senior folks. If there is a really, really driven individual you think should come on the show, on the podcast, happy to take that recommendation as well. So please feel free to share any other name. So you said one is Manish from Jet Privilege.
I'll share the details.
And Harki, obviously, Rahul, I know. I would love to have him on the show. Any other person which comes to your mind?
No, let me think and get back to you. There will be quite a few names, honestly. My life has been spocked with all the operators that I know very well, and I'll be able to bring those.
And I really respect operators.
Yeah.
Chalo, awesome.
Thank you so much, Sid, for having me here.
Yep. Chalo. Good. Thanks for watching the video. If you like the video, please press the like button. Subscribe if you like it, and if you can share it with your friends, I'll be really happy about it. We are working really hard to make good videos, and hopefully future videos will be as exciting as the one you just saw. Thank you.